Hey guys, tonight we step into a world of muddy streets, clattering wooden shoes, and the faint smell of damp wool that never quite leaves your nose. We're wandering into Tudor Britain, a place that feels both familiar and utterly alien. Familiar because of the portraits you've seen of stern Henry VIII or delicate Elizabeth I, but alien because, well, you probably won't survive even a single day here. Forget Netflix, forget hot showers. Your biggest luxury will be hoping the rats don't nibble your toes while you sleep. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop a comment with your location and the local time, because it's always fascinating to see the sleepy little community sprawled across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in the streets of Tudor London around the year 1550. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight of half-timbered houses leaning at odd angles, but the smell. It's a cocktail of horse manure, chamber pots emptied directly into the gutter, and that faint tang of rotting fish. You probably thought your city traffic smelled bad. This is worse. And there's no escaping it. Your shoes, if you even own proper shoes, sink into mud that's really more a mysterious stew of soil, ash, and things you'd rather not ask about. You try to walk along a narrow street, and immediately someone nearly knocks you over with a bundle of firewood. The alleys are so cramped that one cart blocks everything. If you've ever been annoyed at a double-parked car, imagine that. But instead of honking, people just shout in Middle English and maybe throw turnips. Historians still argue whether the streets were actually paved in the busiest parts of London by mid-Tudor times, but your ankles don't really care. They're already wet. A dog brushes past you, ribs sticking out, probably looking for scraps. No collars, no leashes, just feral packs weaving through the legs of butchers and bakers. Children dart barefoot over sharp cobbles, laughing, their faces smudged with soot. And you, modern, pampered you, are already craving hand sanitizer. You glance up at the buildings. Second stories jut out so far they nearly touch above your head. Windows are tiny, more holes than glass, often stuffed with oily parchment to keep out drafts. Sometimes you spot bright cloths fluttering from a noble's residence, or an apothecary's sign with a painted dragon swinging in the breeze. But don't look too long. Someone might think you're gawking, and Tudor Londoners are not shy about calling you out. Now imagine stepping into the wrong puddle. You do, of course. It sloshes up to your ankle, and you realize, far too late, that it isn't just rainwater. Tudor London had a waste system. Technically, it was called throw it out the window. The law says to shout Gardiloo before dumping chamber pots, but not everyone remembers, and certainly not at night. A splash on the head could mean something worse than mud. You instinctively hold your breath, and congratulations. That's your cardio for the day. A bell tolls from St. Paul's Cathedral, a massive stone hulk dominating the skyline. But unlike the postcard view you might imagine, the cathedral is surrounded by rickety stalls selling everything from religious trinkets to second-hand shoes. You weave through the crowd, pressed against strangers in scratchy wool cloaks. Every face is weathered, even young people look a decade older than they are. Life expectancy hovers around 35, though skewed by child mortality. If you're lucky enough to reach adulthood, you might limp into your 50s. You pause at a baker's stall. The smell of warm bread is heavenly, until you notice the flour is grayish. It's often adulterated with ground beans, chalk, or even sawdust. You think twice, but hunger eventually beats squeamishness. The crust is hard enough to chip a tooth, but at least it's food. And just when you start chewing, a cart loaded with carcasses passes by, dripping blood onto the road. Your appetite vanishes almost instantly. A local merchant sizes you up. He notices your odd accent, your strange clothes. You realize too late that blending in here is impossible. People are suspicious of strangers. They might assume you're a thief, a runaway servant, or worse, a spy. It's best to keep moving, eyes low, as if you've always belonged. As evening creeps in, the streets don't exactly calm down. Torches flicker, casting shadows across crooked doorways. Pickpockets lurk, and you clutch your pouch of imaginary Tudor coins a little tighter. You think about home, your warm shower, your fridge stocked with leftovers, and suddenly realize how fragile comfort is. Here, survival is a full-time job, and the streets remind you with every squelching step. And then, just as you're getting used to the din, a trumpet blares, a procession passes, a minor noble on horseback, plumes bobbing, followed by servants clearing the way. Everyone bows slightly, but you hesitate a second too long. A guard glares at you, hand on sword. You bow clumsily, mumbling something about good morrow, and shuffle backward. Somehow, you've avoided trouble for now. You find a corner to lean against, your feet sore, your nose burning from the city's perfume. This is just your first hour in Tudor Britain, and already you long for a nap. But the day has only begun, and the streets hold far stranger encounters. Some dangerous, some just bizarre. You'll need endurance, humor, and maybe a very strong stomach. You wake to the sound of a rooster crowing somewhere beyond thin wooden shutters. The bed beneath you has not been kind. Lumpy straw pokes through the coarse ticking fabric, scratching your skin, and you're fairly certain something small and alive skittered across your leg during the night. The Tudor Inn where you found shelter is no five-star resort. It's more like the world's first draft of Airbnb, and let's just say the review score would be sleep optional. Your blanket is a rough woolen affair that smells faintly of smoke and sheep, and the pillow is little more than a sack stuffed with whatever husks the innkeeper could spare. If you were hoping for a soft mattress, well, think again. This is the century of backaches and chiropractors' dreams. You sit up groggily, rubbing your eyes, only to bump your head on the sloping beam overhead. Welcome to Tudor architecture. Charming from the outside, concussion-inducing from the inside. The room is dim, lit only by daylight sneaking between wooden shutters. You hear muffled sounds below, a clatter of pewter mugs, the grunt of someone hauling a barrel, and the low hum of voices. An inn is more than just lodging. It's a bustling hub, a place where merchants gossip, travelers barter, and locals come to soak up ale instead of water. Because, well, drinking the water is practically an invitation to dysentery. You shuffle downstairs, careful not to trip on the narrow steps worn smooth by centuries of muddy boots. The common room greets you with warmth, the smoky scent of yesterday's fire still lingering in the air. Benches line rough wooden tables, their surfaces sticky from spilled ale. A dog dozes near the hearth, twitching in its sleep, probably dreaming of bones bigger than its entire body. The innkeeper greets you with a nod, sizing you up quickly. He doesn't ask for your name, no one bothers much with that here. Instead, he wants to know how you'll pay. You fumble mentally for Tudor currency, groats, shillings, halfpennies. Don't even think about pulling out a modern banknote. It would look more suspicious than a witch flying through the rafters. Breakfast arrives, if you can call it that. A chunk of yesterday's bread, tough enough to serve as building material, and a bowl of ale so weak it might as well be barley-flavored water. Sometimes they'll throw in a bit of cheese, or if you're lucky, a sliver of salted pork. But today, just bread and ale. You tear off a piece, gnawing until your jaw complains. Welcome to Tudor chewing exercises. Modern dentists would be proud. Historians still argue whether most travelers in Tudor inns were genuinely welcomed or simply tolerated, but one thing's certain, inns were crowded, privacy was a luxury. You probably shared that lumpy bed with another weary traveler last night. Don't worry too much, bed sharing was normal and no one thought twice about it. Just try not to dwell on how many generations of fleas have thrived in that straw mattress. The other guests eye you curiously. A merchant loudly explains how the price of wool is rising. A soldier brags about the battle scars on his arm, and a woman selling ribbons hums to herself while mending her wares. The air is alive with chatter, yet everything feels slightly medieval, like you've stepped onto a stage where the props haven't been updated for centuries. You sip your ale, watery though it is, and notice the mugs are rarely washed. A quick rinse, maybe, if you're lucky. Hygiene here is more a suggestion than a practice. You lower the mug, suddenly aware you might have just shared germs with 3 strangers in a horse groom. Germ theory? Nowhere in sight. People think illness comes from bad air or humor's out of balance. And while you wrinkle your nose at the thought, Tudor folk just shrug. It's normal to them. The dog by the hearth stretches, yawns, and plods over to beg for scraps. You toss a crumb, earning yourself a wagging tail and a new best friend. For a moment, the warmth of the fire, the buzz of voices, and the taste of even stale bread feels oddly cozy, like you could almost settle in, but then you catch sight of a rat darting under a bench, and you remember you're still far from home comforts. The innkeeper's wife appears, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back with a kerchief. She scolds a boy for spilling ale, then turns to stir a pot over the fire. Something simmers inside, a stew of who knows what. If you stay till supper, you'll find out. Hint, don't ask too many questions about the meat. And as you sit there, chewing your breakfast, you realize the day ahead won't be easy. Tudor life doesn't slow down for newcomers. You'll have to keep up with crowded streets, odd customs, and the constant hum of survival. Already your stomach rumbles, your head aches, and your shoes stick to the floorboards from last night's spills. But this is just the morning. The day hasn't even begun. The morning meal hardly satisfies, but you rise anyway, following the scent of smoke and chatter drifting outside. Today you'll take breakfast with the poor, those who don't have the luxury of inbred ale. You step into the street again, dodging muck as you make your way toward a cluster of cottages huddled together like weary sheep. The thatched roofs sag with age, and smoke curls lazily from crooked chimneys. Inside one low doorway, a woman beckons you in. She looks older than her years, hands rough from endless labor, but her eyes are kind. She gestures for you to sit at a rough-hewn table. You crouch on a bench that creaks alarmingly beneath your weight, half afraid it'll collapse and land you on the earthen floor. Your breakfast here is far simpler than the inn's offering, a wooden bowl of pottage. It's a gloopy mixture of oats, water, and whatever scraps the household can spare. Today, a stray onion and a bit of cabbage. If you're expecting bacon or eggs, sorry. For most Tudor commoners, this mush is daily fuel. You take a spoonful, and it tastes earthy, hearty, and slightly smoky, like a campfire got lost in your food. Not terrible, not amazing, just food. Children gather around, giggling at your strange clothes and odd mannerisms. One girl clutches a doll made of rags, its face inked crudely with charcoal. A boy, barefoot and grinning, gnaws on a crust of stale bread so hard he could probably use it as a weapon. You try smiling back, and they whisper to each other, surely deciding you're some peculiar foreigner, which, of course, you are. The adults talk among themselves. News spreads through gossip here, not newspapers. You overhear that a neighbor's cow went dry, another's husband has been drafted for labor on the roads, and someone else insists the king will lower taxes this year, though no one really believes it. Historians still argue whether Tudor poor folk genuinely trusted royal decrees, but the truth is clear. Their survival depends more on neighbors than monarchs. The fire in the hearth smokes more than it flames, filling the small room with a haze that stings your eyes. Chimneys are rare in these cottages. The smoke simply drifts out through a hole in the roof, or not at all. You cough politely, pretending you're fine, though your lungs might disagree. A jug of ale passes around the table. Yes, even the children drink some. It's weak stuff, brewed thin, safer than the questionable water outside. You hesitate, but when the jug reaches you, all eyes watch expectantly. You sip. It's sour but not unpleasant, more like liquid bread than beer. You pass it on, glad to avoid offense. One of the men jokes that if you want something fancy, you'll have to visit the nobility. Everyone laughs, though it's the weary kind of laughter that comes from knowing luxury is out of reach. You chuckle along, pretending you got the joke, though you suspect the punchline is simply, we're poor. The meal doesn't take long. Pottage isn't meant to be savored, just endured. When the bowls are scraped clean, the women set to work washing them in cold water. No soap, just a rinse and a prayer. A hen clucks nearby, pecking hopefully at crumbs. The boy with the bread crust tosses her a piece, and for a moment the room feels cheerful, even cozy. But you can't ignore how thin everyone looks. Malnutrition is common. Rickets and scurvy never far behind. Teeth are crooked, skin weathered. Yet somehow there's resilience here. You realize they don't dwell on what they lack. They simply get on with it. Your modern stomach complains, but theirs have learned not to. A curious detail, you notice dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Sage, rosemary, maybe even tansy. They serve as flavoring, medicine, and sometimes charms against evil. The woman of the house catches your gaze and explains with a wry smile that rosemary keeps away witches. Historians still argue whether commoners truly believe such charms worked or just kept them as tradition, but either way, you nod politely as though rosemary is your new security blanket. When you stand to leave, the family waves you off warmly, as if you've always belonged. They return to their chores, and you step outside into the crisp Tudor morning, belly heavy with oats, lungs filled with smoke, and mind buzzing with questions. Could you live like this every day? Probably not, but for them, it's simply life. Plain, pottage-colored life. The alleys spit you out toward a grander world where mud gives way, well, to only slightly cleaner mud, and timber gives way to thick stone and pale plaster. Word drifts through the crowd that the royal court is in residence, and suddenly every step becomes a lesson in not looking lost. You smooth your worn tunic, try to forget the pottage clinging to your breath, and follow a stream of better-dressed people with the confidence of someone who definitely belongs here. You don't. The city's smells, ale, smoke, cabbage, fade under beeswax and rose oil as you approach tall gates guarded by men who seem allergic to smiling. Inside the palace precinct, everything softens, the thud of hooves on sanded ground, the whisper of silk skirts, the jangle of gilt scabbards. A flurry of liveried servants crosses your path like migrating birds, each certain of their route. You are certain of nothing except that your shoes make an embarrassing squelch. A porter barks for you to move along, and you adopt the Tudor shuffle, head respectfully bowed, eyes flicking just enough to spot the next obstacle, hands folded as though you've always known what to do with them. The corridors are dim but gleaming, the light caught in painted ceilings and tapestries heavy with mythic scenes, gods, hunts, and battles that feel a world away from smoky cottages. You drift past the great hall where long tables wait for trenchers and talk, and toward the great watching chamber, a bustling antechamber where courtiers loiter with purpose. Here is where favor is granted or lost with a nod. It's the slowest, most intense game of notice me you've ever seen. You practice your court face, respectful, lightly amused, and just mysterious enough that people think you might be somebody. You are not somebody, but points for posture. A flurry of movement draws your gaze. Gentlemen sport slash sleeves revealing bright linings, their doublets stitched tight as flattery. Ladies' gowns rustle in layered harmony, ruffs crisp enough to slice a turnip. Sumptuary laws hover like invisible ushers. You know without being told that certain colors belong to those with titles or deep pockets. You make a mental note not to wear purple. Or, really, anything that looks like it could pay your rent for a year. A gold-fretted door opens and shuts, and a soft wave of perfume wafts out. Citrus, cloves, musk. Pomanders dangle from belts, bright as fruit, masking a world that runs on sweat. Your own rosemary from the rafter experience makes you smile. Here, the charm is orange and spice, not hedge herbs. Still, the goal is the same: keep foul airs, and perhaps evil, at bay. Historians still argue whether elite obsession with sweet scents was merely fashion or a genuine prophylactic belief against miasma, but either way, you consider adopting a clove-studded lemon as your new emotional support object. A chamberlain glides through like a swan with paperwork, his velvet sleeves trailing authority. He announces that petitions may be presented later, and the cluster of hopeful faces tightens. This is the mainstream truth of Tudor power. Proximity matters. The Privy Chamber controls access. The Privy Council manages policy, and the person who secures a moment of the sovereign's attention can tilt a career like a well-aimed lance in the tilt yard. You practice a bow so cautious it barely risks your spine. Court etiquette is a contact sport, but only for vertebrae. First joke of the day. You quietly give yourself a gold star for not tripping on your own humility. You edge near a window where sunlight dusts the air, and a kindly clerk takes pity. He explains the rhythm: morning devotions, audiences, suppers, masks, progresses in summer when the court travels to show royal presence, and to avoid London's smells you know all too well. He warns you not to block doorways, not to speak unless spoken to, and never to confuse a lord with a gentleman, unless your bucket list includes start a feud before lunch. You nod so vigorously your ruff that isn't a ruff wobbles. Conversation eddies around you. Someone praises a new Italianate mask. Someone else mutters that the sovereign's temper is fair today, which is to say unpredictable but not storming. A young gallant boasts of his fencing master from Antwerp, while another produces a pocket set of grooming tools, ear spoon, nail pick, toothpick, dangling from his belt like a tiny toolbox for vanity. You pretend that, yes, of course, you also carry an ear spoon. Second joke. In your time, this would be a self-care kit. Here, it's social armor. Near the hearth, a gentleman recounts a tale about the groom of the stool, the intimate official overseeing the monarch's privy and, by extension, access petitions and delicate secrets. It sounds absurd until you realize the political logic. If you control the threshold of privacy, you control the flow of influence. Historians still argue whether the role's power varied wildly by personality or remained consistently critical, but everyone agrees the title provoked more snickers in later centuries than it did in its own. You file this under quirky tidbits you did not expect to admire. A rustle moves like wind through wheat, a hush follows. You pivot a fraction, enough to glimpse a flash of jewels, a stiffened bodice, the poise of royalty, or at least of someone very close to it. Heads dip, you dip too, discovering new muscles in your neck reserved for deference. The sovereign passes, or perhaps a leading favorite, it hardly matters. The protocol is the same. In that brief shimmer of presence, you feel how the court's gravity holds everyone in orbit. Poets, soldiers, petitioners, dancers, spies disguised as flirts and flirts disguised as spies. Historians still argue whether factional conflict or ideological conviction primarily steered policy at court. But from where you stand, it looks like both ride tandem with gossip holding the reins. After, the room exhales and resumes its delicate chaos. A lutenist twangs a gentle pattern near a window. You recognize the melody after 12 measures and then wish you didn't. Third joke, it's the 16th century version of that one song every cafe insists on replaying until your soul becomes wallpaper. A sugar plate is passed and you're handed a tiny marchpane sweet molded like a flower. It's delicious and cloying, and you suspect terrible for your teeth. Among courtiers, blackened teeth sometimes pass for chic, evidence of costly sugar, though nobody will admit the dentist is despairing. You lick your lips, suddenly conscious that your own smile is untrendy in its healthy plainness. You are nudged toward the presence chamber threshold, where standing is both honor and ordeal. Your knees negotiate the art of being quietly supportive furniture. You study etiquette like it's a survival manual. Never turn your back abruptly. Keep your hat in your hand unless commanded otherwise. Laugh at the right places and never at the wrong person. Networking here is choreography, not conversation. You consider inventing the world's first LinkedIn endorsement. Would bow beside again. A herald calls for silence as a petition is read. Land, licenses, marriages, monopolies, requests braid together personal ambition and national policy. The mainstream fact is simple. The Tudor state is personal. To ask the crown is to ask a person, and to be seen is to exist politically. You try not to think about your muddy boots, your pottage breath, or the rosemary you mentally clutch like a talisman. Instead, you keep your gaze soft, your posture precise, and your hopes modest. Exit this chamber with dignity and without being noticed by the wrong eyes. At last, you are released into a cooler gallery, where tapestries picture Hercules in improbable tights. Servants sweep fresh rushes underfoot, scattering lavender and mint that crunch softly as you walk. The fragrance reminds you faintly of that cottage hearth, only curated to a shine. Outside, a trumpet signals activity in the tilt yard. Inside, a poet mutters hexameters for a patron. The court is a mirror palace. Every surface reflects status. Every move refracts intent. You smile to yourself, a thin curve of survival. You have not stumbled, not fainted, not mistaken a baron for a butler. By Tudor standards, you're thriving. If by thriving we mean not exiled to the outer rooms. When you finally step back into the lesser corridors, the world's volume rises, pots banging in the kitchens, pages running messages, a dog skittering after a bone as if rank applies to canines too. You breathe more easily, and the sin of beeswax yields to honest human bustle. The court recedes behind you like a glittering tide, leaving a fine film of awe in your skin. You tug your sleeves, square your shoulders, and aim your steps toward the next ordeal, grateful for the practice you've had at bowing, shuffling, and pretending to belong. In a place where a glance can be a gate and a pomander a shield, you have learned the day's quiet art. Survive by moving like silk through thorns. You step out of the glittering corridors and back into the nation of wool, where clothing talks and sheep never really leave the room. Tudor fashion isn't a flourish, it's infrastructure you wear. Start where everybody starts. The linen shift next to your skin. Good linen slides like cool paper. Coarse linen feels like honesty. Either way, it's the washable layer between you and the rest. The parts that smell of lanolin and smoke. If you're dressing as a woman, the kirtle goes on next, laced firm so your back behaves. If you're dressing as a man, a doublet closes snug over your ribs, and little cords called points tie your hose to it, turning your waist into a drawbridge that refuses to collapse. You shift, the points tug you straight. Then there's the codpiece, parked like a punctuation mark from a language you didn't study. Historians still argue whether it was mostly modesty, swagger, or padding for medical worries. You just try to look brave. The wool outer gown arrives with weight and purpose. It hangs from your shoulders like a polite barn door, edged with colored guards, and if you're lucky, slashed sleeves let bright linings peep through, echoes of those peacocks in the antechambers you just escaped. Sumptuary laws hum around you, quiet but firm. Certain colors, furs, and silks belong to ranks you do not hold. Mainstream fact, clothing is regulated by law. Your outfit can be an invoice for fines if you show off too loudly. Now the ruff, a white wheel of starched optimism that snaps around your neck and instantly upgrades your posture. Starchers set the pleats with warm poking irons. A fashionable household may tint the finish, saffron yellow or bluish to hide adventures in the tub. Historians still argue whether those colors signaled cosmopolitan confidence or clever stain management, but your verdict is simpler. Once it's tied on, you cannot slouch. First gentle joke. This collar is a wearable manners coach. Hair needs taming. A coiffer cap keeps it neat. With means, you set a French hood, geometry that announces I own pins. Pins are tiny treasure used by the dozen to fasten sleeves, partlets, and veils. Quirky tidbit. Households end the day with a pin hunt, sifting rushes for escapees like prospectors. You imagine a midnight meeting between bare toes and lost metal and suddenly love shoes. Shoes are stout leather. To rise above the gutter's mystery liquid, you strap on pattens, wooden overshoes that lift you into relative grace. Their clop-clop makes the lane sound like cautious tap dance. Second gentle joke. Congratulations, you've invented Tudor ASMR. Low-fee pattens to step to while you sleep. Inside the shoe, oak bark lingers. You're a walking herbarium. Washing? Linen, yes. Wool, rarely. Lye soap is fierce, water's work, and wind is free. Fullers scour cloth with fuller's earth, and yes, stale urine, and ammonia magic that makes fabric behave. You keep your face serene and edge your pomander closer, remembering that clove-studded orange at court. Historians still argue whether those deep portrait blacks came from logwood dyes or layered tricks. Either way, your neighborhood wardrobe mostly favors browns that forgive. If you're high status, a farthingale shapes your skirt into a neat bell, turning doorways into puzzles and chairs into negotiation. Sit correctly and you fold like a disciplined deck chair. Sit wrong and you become a dignified trebuchet. A partlet fills the neckline, sleeves lace on and off. A decorative stomacher plates the front. Men prefer a padded chest and clipped waist, a heraldic pigeon that struts without moving. You square your shoulders and try not to look like a pigeon impersonator. Hats finish sentences, felt caps, bonnets, tall crowns, and, if fortunes smile, beaver. Before you speak, your hat has introduced you to the street. You test a feather and then remove it before it writes checks your status can't cash. Third gentle joke. In your century, you'd post a fit check. Here, the fit checks you back and asks for references. Clothes here are modular. Garments tie into one another so nothing sags alone. A seam fails, and its neighbor quietly takes the load. The tailor shows you to wax thread with beeswax, backstitch like you mean it, and press with a warm stone. The rhythm slows you. Push the needle, pull the thread, breathe. Under portraits and proclamations, this is the heartbeat of fashion. Maintained, mended, made to last. Mainstream fact, most people own few outfits and invest in repair, not replacement. You catch your reflection in a pewter plate and think about teeth. Among courtiers, blackened smiles sometimes pass as proof of sugar. Among neighbors, they read as pain with receipts. You roll a clove across your tongue, a tiny truce with pottage breath and ale mornings, and remember the rosemary charm swaying from cottage rafters. Herbs, pomanders, starch, different tools for the same wish. To smell like hope. By afternoon, you can read the street by fabric, the baker's singed cuffs, the fisher's tarred cap, the clerk's ink freckles, the gentleman's glove soft enough to pet clouds. Children skitter in hand-me-down hose, a peddler unfurls ribbons bright enough to ring the day. You buy a narrow one the color of dawn and tuck it into a sleeve slit, a private sunrise that breaks no law. Historians still argue whether London fashion trickled quickly to distant shires or seeped slowly like dye through cloth. Either way, imitation is patient. Evening cool gathers, and your layers earn their keep. The ruff breathes at your neck like a calm cloud. The gown holds the day's heat, the cap keeps your thoughts tidy. You retie a point, smooth a sleeve, and feel yourself settling into the small architecture you've built. It's heavier than your modern closet and far more talkative. It announces rank, requests courtesy, and files a complaint if you've been too fast. Yet it also carries kindness. It warms you, shelters you, and lets you pass. You don't undress yet, you just stand for a slow moment wrapped in oak and sheep, starch and clove, surprised to be tired in the useful way, the kind that comes from learning a new alphabet of ties and folds. If you can master this language, you might pass another day. If not, well, remember the pattens. They'll keep you an inch above disaster while you practice. You follow the flow of people out of the quieter lanes and into a broad, jostling square, and suddenly the noise hits you like a drum. It's market day, and Tudor London has decided to gather all its smells, sounds, and sights in one place, bundle them together, and present them as the world's least restful carnival. You try to breathe shallowly, though that doesn't really help. There's fish, always fish, laid out on wooden boards with their eyes staring upward as if asking for reincarnation paperwork. Beside them, chickens squawk indignantly from wicker cages, pigs squeal as they're tugged on ropes, and butchers wave knives in a way that makes you decide vegetarianism could have been invented here, but wasn't. Everywhere you look, there's shouting. Sellers sing out prices for onions, garlic, and baskets of turnips. One fellow with impressive lungs yells about ginger and pepper as though he personally sailed to the Indies to get them. A woman thrusts ribbons toward you, insisting the green sets off your eyes. Another presses pewter spoons into your hands before you realize what's happening. You back away, only to step directly into a heap of cabbage leaves mixed with something far less vegetable. You lift your foot slowly, regretting your life choices. Historians still argue whether Tudor markets were truly as chaotic as chroniclers described or whether writers exaggerated for color, but judging by your current ankle-deep experience, you'd cast your vote for chaos. This is not a polite farmer's market with craft soap and acoustic guitar. This is survival in surround sound. You pass the fishmongers and someone shouts, "Fresh today," with an enthusiasm that doesn't quite match the smell. Quirky tidbit. Many stalls sprinkle stale fish with vinegar or even rub them with nettles to fake freshness. You lean in, sniff, and immediately regret leaning in. You pretend to admire an eel instead, which looks suspiciously alive. It blinks. You blink back. You keep walking. At a baker's stand, flat rounds of bread are stacked high. Some loaves are marked with symbols baked into the crust, a guarantee of weight. If the baker cheats, the punishment is public humiliation or worse, stocks, fines, even losing an ear. You buy a hunk, chewing while weaving through the crowd. It's coarse, dark, and dense enough to double as a doorstop. You decide it could serve as both breakfast and weapon. Suddenly, a commotion breaks out. Two apprentices squabble over stolen apples, and within seconds a circle of spectators forms, cheering them on as if this is free entertainment, which technically it is. One lands a punch, the other shoves back into a cabbage cart, and soon there are vegetables flying like an early modern food fight. You duck, only to catch a turnip to the shoulder. First gentle joke. Congratulations, you've been knighted by produce. Moving on quickly, you notice the stalls aren't just food. Cloth merchants display bolts of wool dyed in russet green and deep blue. A silversmith lays out trinkets that catch the sun. Herbalists sell dried bundles tied with string, sage for cleansing, lavender for sleep, wormwood for who knows what. A boy waves a wooden whistle, shrill enough to make you question your hearing. His mother haggles loudly with a butcher, both of them wielding words sharper than knives. A bell tolls midday, and the crowd barely notices. You realize the market is also a news network. Ballad singers chant rhymes about a ship lost at sea. A preacher warns of sin in the alleys. A gossip monger whispers that the queen favors a new courtier. No broadsheets yet, but information crackles in the air faster than you can follow. Your stomach growls at the smell of hot meat pies from a vendor balancing a tray. You buy one only to discover it's mostly crust with something mysterious inside. Could be beef, could be pigeon, could be hope. You chew anyway because this is Tudor Britain and you don't get picky. Second gentle joke. You've just invented the mystery flavor snack centuries before jelly beans. Suddenly, a cry, "Make way!" A cart creaks through, pulled by a pair of oxen. The wheels splash through muck, sending bystanders scattering. You leap aside straight into a puddle that clutches at your patent shoes. The driver curses, cracking his whip, while a boy runs ahead clearing a path. Markets are arteries of the city, and sometimes the blood pressure spikes. A friar moves through the crowd holding out a box for alms. Some toss coins, others look away. He pauses near you, staring pointedly, and you fumble with your purse. A penny drops, and he nods gravely, blessing you with a mutter before vanishing into the press of people. You wonder whether you just bought spiritual insurance. Toward the edge of the market, a tinker mends pots with hammer and rivet, while beside him a tooth drawer waves pliers and boasts about painless service. His patient screams loud enough to make the pigs jealous. You decide your teeth, blackened or not, will stay exactly where they are. Historians still argue whether tooth drawers were tolerated charlatans or valued professionals, but your modern dental plan suddenly looks divine. By late afternoon, your senses feel frayed. The smell of fish clings to your clothes. Your ears ring with cries of "bye, bye, bye," and your pockets are lighter from haggling losses. You've tasted bread, pie, and regret. And just as you consider retreating, a minstrel begins strumming a lute near the square's edge. His tune is repetitive, cheerful, and astonishingly bad. Third gentle joke. You realize the lute might be history's first noise complaint generator. You weave your way out, dodging another cart, avoiding another eel, clutching your mystery pie remains. The market buzz fades behind you, though the smells cling like stubborn ghosts. Your day in Tudor Britain has offered you food, fashion, gossip, and bruises, all available for purchase at the low cost of dignity. The square fades behind you as a new sound rises above the market racket, solemn bells tolling across the town. People drift in that direction, almost magnetized. You follow, swept along, and soon you're standing outside a stone church that looks both mighty and weary, its walls patched with moss, its windows narrow and high. This is the heart of community life, whether you're here to pray, gossip, or simply avoid being noticed as a heathen. You shuffle through the great wooden doors, the smell of damp stone and candle wax enveloping you. The interior is dim, sunlight filtering through fragments of colored glass. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down, though in truth the church is less ancient than it looks. Tudor rebuilding and repairs have left their mark. A clerk hands you a dog-eared prayer book in Latin which might as well be Martian to you. You nod politely, though the words run like rain off your ears. The benches are hard, straight, and unyielding, and you quickly discover that the real test of Tudor piety is lower back stamina. Families pack in, muttering greetings, and a dog curls beneath a pew, sighing loudly. A boy beside you kicks his heels against the wood in a rhythm that threatens your sanity. You smile at him. He grins back, missing several teeth. The priest begins, voice booming in Latin phrases you can't follow. Historians still argue whether Tudor congregations truly understood the words, or simply absorbed the rhythm like music. You lean toward the latter. The drone is oddly soothing, even hypnotic, until you realize the service has already been going on for an hour, and you haven't even reached the sermon. The mainstream fact is clear. Religion in Tudor Britain is not optional. Attendance at church is legally required, and absence earns fines. Even if you'd rather nap, you sit here eyes wide, pretending to track every word. People glance around occasionally, less to admire stained glass than to see who's present. Reputation is built as much in pews as in fields. Your legs ache, your stomach complains, and still the chanting rolls on. You wonder how anyone endures this weekly marathon. A whisper drifts from behind. Two women muttering about a neighbor's scandal, how her bread rose poorly and her husband hasn't been seen at market. Quirky tidbit. Gossip during services is common enough that priests sometimes preach against it, which naturally gives the gossips more material. The sermon finally arrives, shifting to English. The priest rails against sin, warns about vanity, and makes a pointed remark about alehouse idlers. You resist the urge to raise your hand, guilty by association from your in-visit. Historians still argue whether Tudor sermons were more political than religious, especially under monarchs who dictated doctrine. From your pew, it feels like a bit of both, plus some free scolding thrown in for sport. Kneeling is next. You drop onto a wooden board that digs mercilessly into your knees. You shift, wince, and glance at the locals, who seem unfazed. Years of practice have calloused them into endurance. You, however, begin bargaining silently with any deity willing to shorten the ritual by a few minutes. The service drags on, your mind wandering. You study the carvings on the choir stalls, grotesque little faces with wide eyes and toothy grins. One sticks out its tongue, mocking your discomfort. You imagine the craftsman chuckling centuries ago, knowing some weary soul like you would one day find relief in the mischief. First gentle joke. Congratulations, you've made friends with a wooden gargoyle. The smell of incense wafts through the nave, sweet and heady. You breathe it in, grateful for a break from the fish market odor clinging to your sleeves. But the smoke mixes with the damp air and soon you're coughing, earning a sharp glare from an old woman who clearly thinks you should know better. You bow your head, pretending it was a sneeze of piety. Finally, the priest raises his hands, the blessing is spoken, and the congregation exhales. People shuffle toward the doors, relief written on their faces. Outside, the sunlight feels brighter, the air fresher, even if it's still spiced with manure and smoke. Children run ahead, laughing, freed from pew prison. Adults linger to chat, turning the churchyard into a secondary market of news, deals, and quiet matchmaking. You step aside, massaged by the crowd's energy. A man claps another on the back, promising ale later. A woman pulls you into conversation about the weather, which in Tudor Britain is more than small talk. It's survival. Rain means hunger, sun means harvest, frost means death. You nod sagely as though you've been studying clouds for years. By the time you leave the churchyard, your body feels drained but oddly lighter. You survive the ordeal of Latin, hard benches, and kneeling boards. The gargoyle still grins in your memory, mocking you, and you chuckle softly. Second gentle joke. You realize church services are basically medieval yoga, except with more kneeling and less flexibility. You drift back into the streets, ears ringing faintly from chanting, knees stiff, soul mildly bewildered. Yet you've ticked the box of Tudor legality. You've attended church. And tomorrow, when neighbors swap stories, your presence will be noted. Attendance isn't just about God, it's about being seen. And in Tudor Britain, being seen is the difference between belonging and suspicion. The churchyard disperses, but you catch a group of boys in patched hose heading off with slates under their arms. Curiosity tugs you along. Soon you're standing outside a low-timbered building with narrow windows and a door scarred by generations of impatient hands. This is the local school, and whether you like it or not, you're about to become a pupil. You step inside and immediately regret it. The air smells of ink, damp wool, and the faint sting of birch rods. The room is bare, save for benches, a lectern, and a chalkboard. Boys perch stiffly, quills ready, while a master in a long gown and cap eyes them like a hawk. You slide onto a bench, trying to look inconspicuous, but the master calls roll in sonorous tones and then fixes you with a stare that says, "No excuses here." Your heart sinks. "Ad principium," he declares, and the lesson begins. Latin, of course it's Latin. The boys chant in unison, "Amo, amus, amet." The drone fills the room, a sing-song rhythm that feels like a Gregorian remix. You stumble over the syllables, your tongue uncooperative. The boy next to you smirks, clearly enjoying your misery. Historians still argue whether Tudor schools emphasize true comprehension or just endless memorization, but in this room the answer is obvious: memorize or suffer. Your slate is slapped in front of you, chalk stub waiting. The task: conjugate verbs. You attempt, "I love, you love, he loves, go away." But what comes out looks more like a medical prescription. The master passes by, eyes narrowing. You brace for impact. Sure enough, the rod smacks down on the desk beside your hand, sharp enough to make you jump. First, gentle joke. Congratulations, you've just invented the pop quiz panic attack. The mainstream fact: discipline in Tudor schools is no joke. Beatings are routine, rods the punctuation marks of every error. Some masters favor canes, others birches, and all claim it's for the child's soul. You rub your wrist, wishing for a protective sleeve of armor. Quirky tidbit: some boys grew so familiar with punishment that they carved tally marks into benches, a secret scoreboard of endurance. You glance down, yes, there are scratches here too. The chanting resumes, mens mentis f, nouns now, with genders to memorize. You sigh, your modern brain rebelling, but the others echo obediently, as if their mouths are instruments and the master the conductor. Between chants, the master lectures on morality, weaving in examples from the Bible and from Cicero. Education is not just knowledge, it's training citizens loyal to God and crown. You slouch, the ruff at your neck pressing against your chin, and pretend to absorb wisdom while really counting knots in the timber. A boy in front slips a walnut shell across the bench, rolling it toward you. Inside is a tiny scrap of paper with a doodle, a lopsided caricature of the master. You stifle a laugh, almost choke, and quickly pass it along. Even here, centuries before notebooks full of cartoons, students find ways to rebel. Historians still argue whether the strictness of Tudor pedagogy crushed creativity or secretly fueled it through these small acts of defiance. You, at least, feel momentarily lighter. The lesson shifts to writing. Quills scratch furiously as boys copy Latin sentences onto paper. Ink blots bloom like bruises across the page. Your hand cramps almost instantly. The master demands precision, letters formed evenly, no waste of paper, no careless mistakes. You glance at your blotched sheet and wonder how Tudor children ever had hands left for farming chores after such marathons. Second gentle joke, you realize carpal tunnel syndrome could have been called scribe's revenge in this century. When the noon bell tolls, the boys exhale, no lunches appear. Most will hurry home for a crust of bread before returning. You lag behind, knees stiff, eyes blurred from Latin. A sympathetic boy whispers that some schools, especially in cities, run from dawn to dusk with only short breaks. You nearly faint at the thought. Modern recess suddenly feels like paradise lost. As you leave, the master reminds everyone to recite Psalms by heart tomorrow. You nod, though the only psalm you remember is, "Please let me survive." The boys spill into the street, tossing their walnut shells like dice, laughing despite sore backsides and inky fingers. You trail after them, rubbing the red mark where the rod struck, and marvel at their resilience. Education here is brutal, relentless, yet strangely communal. Knowledge is both weapon and shield. Latin grants access to law, church, even court. But for now, you just carry sore knees, a smudged slate, and the hum of Amo Amas Amet lodged permanently in your brain. Third gentle joke. Congratulations, you've discovered the world's earliest earworm and its conjugation. By the time you step back into daylight, the market noise seems almost peaceful compared to the drone of verbs. You inhale deeply, grateful for the open air, even if it's tinged with manure. Surviving Tudor school is possible, but thriving? That might take more than memory. It might take divine patience. Your legs ache from the wooden bench and your ears still hum with Amo, Amas, Amat, but a sudden invitation lifts your spirits. Dinner in a noble hall. You follow the stream of servants carrying trenchers, pitchers, and platters through a great timber doorway into a chamber glowing with firelight. The scent of roasting meat overwhelms you. Grease and spice mingling in heavy, delicious waves. Your stomach growls loud enough to earn a raised eyebrow from a steward. The hall itself is magnificent in its way, a high roof with carved beams, banners hanging, and a great hearth blazing at one end. Long tables stretch out, their surfaces scattered with rushes that crunch faintly under your feet. Nobles cluster at the high table on a dais, their clothes gleaming with silks and jewels, while you and lesser folk find seats lower down. The seating plan is not random, it is hierarchy made visible. Mainstream fact, in Tudor society, you literally ate your rank. A trumpet blasts, startling you so badly you nearly drop your cup. First gentle joke. You realize this is their version of ding, your table is ready. Servants sweep in, bearing trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread that serve as plates. Onto these they ladle portions of roasted beef, capons, and something resembling a pie, but topped with hard-boiled eggs, staring like watchful eyes. You poke at it cautiously, then risk a bite. The crust is dense, the filling savory, and the eggs, well, you decide not to stare back. Musicians perch on a gallery, plucking lutes and fiddles. Their tunes swirl through the air, cheerful but repetitive. After the fifth repetition, you suspect they only know 3 songs. Nobles murmur politely, but you catch glimpses of yawns hidden behind jeweled hands. Quirky tidbit. Sometimes musicians were told to keep playing for hours without pause, turning background music into a mild endurance contest. The wine jug arrives, but don't expect refinement. Ale and small beer dominate. Though the lord of the house might boast imported sack or claret, you sip cautiously. It tastes rough, sharp, yet oddly comforting after days of cabbage pottage. Bread trenchers soak up the grease until they become soggy, at which point servants whisk them away, not to waste, but to hand out later to the poor at the gates. Recycling, Tudor style. Conversation buzzes around you. To your left, two gentlemen debate the merits of a new Italian fencing style. To your right, a lady whispers about rumors from court. Everyone speaks just loudly enough to be overheard. Gossip is currency, after all. You nod occasionally, feigning expertise, though the only sword you've handled recently is a butter knife. Suddenly, a steward shouts, and a whole roasted peacock is carried in, feathers reattached to its cooked body for display. Gasps ripple through the hall. Historians still argue whether peacock was actually eaten or simply paraded as a symbol of extravagance. You decide not to find out firsthand. The idea of chewing those jeweled feathers makes your jaw ache. Second gentle joke, you think of it as Tudor Britain's version of food Instagram. Looks amazing, tastes questionable. As the meal continues, the noise grows. Jokes fly, cups clatter, dogs bark under the tables, hoping for scraps. One bold hound noses your trencher, and you shove it away gently, hoping no one notices you nearly lost your dinner to a terrier. Servants rush back and forth, filling cups, swapping trenchers, sweeping bones into baskets. Everything happens at once, eating, gossiping, music, barking, laughter, sneezes. It is overwhelming, like dining in the middle of a marketplace with better food. Toward the high table, the noble host raises a hand. Silence spreads, broken only by the snap of the fire. He offers a toast to the king, to the realm, to prosperity. Cups clink, ale sloshes, and you mumble along, hoping your accent doesn't betray you. Then the noise returns, louder than before, as though silence had been a spring compressed too tightly. Finally, dessert. Marchpane, sugared almonds, candied orange peel. Your teeth protest, but your tongue rejoices. Sugar is expensive, imported, and flaunted as a sign of wealth. You savor each bite, aware that your molars may never forgive you. Quirky tidbit. Nobles sometimes blackened their teeth on purpose to show they could afford sugar, a fashion statement that dentists everywhere would later regret. As dinner winds down, the musicians strike up a livelier tune, and a few guests attempt dances in the center of the hall. Their steps are formal, stiff, and practiced, nothing like the carefree stomping you might expect. You attempt to mimic, stumble, and retreat quickly before anyone notices. Third gentle joke. You've just invented the wallflower, centuries ahead of schedule. The Lord rises, signaling the feast's end. Guests bow, servants clear, and you stumble out into the cooler night air, head buzzing from ale, ears ringing with lutes, and stomach groaning under layers of meat and marchpane. You survive the noble dinner, barely. And as you glance back at the hall's glowing windows, you realize that while the food was rich, the real feast was hierarchy itself. Served course by course. The noble hall's glow fades behind you, and reality hits in the form of a very different necessity. Your belly is full of marchpane and mystery pies, but there's only one destination now, the Tudor toilet. Forget porcelain, forget plumbing. This is an age of privies, guardrobes, and chamber pots, and you're about to meet them all. First stop, the privy chamber tucked in a corner of the manor, a wooden seat set above a chute, drafty as a cave. You sit gingerly, staring into darkness that swallows anything you offer. The wind whistles up, making the experience less relief and more Arctic adventure. Quirky tidbit, some guardrabes doubled as wardrobes. Clothes hung inside because people believed the ammonia fumes deterred moths. You eye the hooks nearby and decide your tunic deserves a better fate. If you're poor, privacy is a luxury. You squat over a simple hole in the ground outside, hoping neighbors are too polite or too busy to watch. Chamber pots are more common, ceramic or metal bowls kept under the bed. In the morning, someone, often a very unlucky servant, empties the contents into the gutter. Mainstream fact, Londoners were supposed to shout "Gardy-loo" before tossing waste into the street, but in practice, it was more surprise than warning. You remember your earlier puddle incident and suddenly connect the dots. You wander into the city lanes at night and see the reality. Ditches brimming, gutters flowing, chamber pots clattering against cobbles. A boy slips, curses, and decides his shoes will never recover. First gentle joke. Congratulations, you've discovered Tudor Britain's unofficial water park, complete with questionable slides. Paper? Don't even dream of it. Moss, rags, straw, or your hand will do. Wealthier folks use linen scraps or, for the truly extravagant, wool. You think fondly of your modern bathroom cabinet, a paradise of soft rolls and lavender scent. Historians still argue whether imported toilet paper from China ever reached Tudor England in tiny amounts, but for 99% of people, wiping was more hedge than luxury. Public privies exist, wooden huts perched over pits, sometimes extending over rivers. The Thames itself receives more contributions than you want to imagine. Quirky tidbit. In some London areas, latrines were built on bridges, so waste dropped straight into the current. You watch a man shuffle into one, sigh loudly, and reemerge looking lighter, if not cleaner. Cleanliness here is relative. A servant carries a jug of water to wash hands, but soap is harsh, lye-based, and rough on skin. You rinse anyway, grateful for the cold splash. The noble guests earlier seemed unbothered, perfume pomanders dangling to mask what soap does not. You dab at your own hands, decide rosemary sprigs might be your best bet, and tuck one into your sleeve. Second gentle joke. Congratulations, you've invented Tudor hand sanitizer, rosemary scented edition. The dangers of privies go beyond smell. Rats thrive here, slipping through gaps, scavenging. Fires occasionally spark from candles carried into cramped stalls. And worst of all, disease lurks. Historians still argue whether the spread of plague was more due to fleas on rats or general filth, but privies certainly didn't help. You shiver, stepping back quickly as though the smell itself might follow you home. Returning to your lodging, you find the chamber pot waiting under the bed, its rim chipped, its interior less than inviting. The straw mattress creaks as you shift it aside, and you wonder who used it before you. Sharing isn't just about beds here, it's about everything, even waste. A child whines, a dog sniffs curiously, and you make a mental note. Never, ever leave the lid off. You sit quietly reflecting. Toilets are usually the most private part of your day, but in Tudor Britain, they're oddly public, woven into street life, cottage chores, and palace gossip. The groom of the stool at court, remember him, literally builds power through proximity to such moments. What's embarrassing to you is political currency to him. Third gentle joke, you realize the Tudors invented oversharing centuries before social media. By candlelight, the night grows thick, the air heavy with the lingering scent of rushes and smoke. You curl back into the straw bed, chamber pot uncomfortably close, and think, maybe you wouldn't last a day in Tudor Britain, not for the plagues or punishments, but for the bathrooms. Your night is short, and your stomach, still full of noble meats and market pies, stages a rebellion at dawn. You cough, you ache, and you decide, reluctantly, that you need a Tudor cure. This means stepping into a world where illness is a conversation between your body's four humors and a very confident barber with a bowl. You miss your modern cabinet of neat bottles. Here, the medicine chest is the garden, the cellar, and occasionally the poultry yard. You start at the apothecary's shop, a narrow cave of scents. Shelves glow with glass vessels, each stoppered like secrets. Dried rosemary, your old friend, sage, rue, and angelica hang from beams. Jars whisper of myrrh, mithridate, treacle, the famous theriac, not pancake syrup, and something politely labeled oil of earthworms. Pestles thud in mortars. The apothecary peers at your tongue, checks your pulse, and nods with the slow gravity of a man who has sold many jars of hope. Mainstream fact, healing here is humoral, hot, cold, wet, dry, so every remedy aims to rebalance you, not annihilate a germ nobody's named yet. He prescribes a cordial of violet and honey for your cough, a purge to lighten the melancholy, and a comforting electuary thick as tar. You swallow the cordial. It tastes like a well-behaved meadow. You sip the purge. It tastes like the meadow after the sheep have visited. First gentle joke. Congratulations, you've invented the Tudor juice cleanse, now with extra regret. Across the street spins the red-white barber pole, that cheerful candy cane which you now learn advertises bloodletting. Inside, the barber surgeon sharpens a flame while explaining that your heat is excessive, your bile unruly, and your stars decidedly fidgety. He offers a cupping set, a few neat nicks, or leeches if you're feeling luxurious. You choose leeches because, absurdly, it sounds gentler. The little creatures latch on like quiet critics, and you watch your courage drain at roughly the same rate as your blood. Historians still argue whether routine bleeding helped by reducing fever strain or merely weakened patients into compliance. Your current conclusion is that it definitely weakens conversation. The barber, pleased, shows off tools of his other trade: tooth keys for stubborn molars, cautery irons for sealing wounds, trepanning bits for skulls unlucky in tavern debates. You decide your headache is cured after all. Quirky tidbit. To prove a bezoar stone could counter poison, some nobles staged demonstrations with condemned animals. Dramatic, perhaps persuasive, and entirely unhelpful to the goat. You consider buying a cheaper talisman, a clove-studded pomander like the court favorites carry, a perfumed shield against bad airs. The scent steadies you, a fragrant placebo you're happy to believe in. A kindly neighbor recommends a wise woman farther down the lane. You go because you're collecting experiences now like pins in a cap. Her cottage smells of smoke and mint. Herbs dry over the hearth like a green curtain. She listens longer than the barber, watches your breath, asks about your dreams. From a small crock, she spoons out a paste of crushed snails and plantain for your sore throat to be dabbed along the jawline. You hesitate. Snails? Then remember you already bled yourself for science. The paste is cool, earthy, and faintly embarrassing. Historians still argue whether such cunning folk were persecuted healers or pragmatic neighbors tolerated for results. Your jaw, soothed by snail serenity, files a quiet vote for results. She pours you a tisane of coltsfoot and licorice and advises rest, warmth, and a linen kerchief steeped in vinegar laid on the chest. You exhale into the steam the way you breathe incense in church and feel your ribs loosen. She tells you to sleep with a sprig of rosemary tucked by the pillow for comfort and courage. It's the same herb hung in the poor cottage and dangled from belts at court, one plant, many hopes. Outside, a bell tolls in the distance, plague rumors again. You step carefully. Panic can be as contagious as fleas. Bills on doors, whispers of shut-up houses, watchmen paid to keep families inside. The city has its crude quarantines. Mainstream fact, outbreaks recur across the Tudor century, met with flight by those who can and prayer by those who cannot. You recall the groom of the stool and marvel that a world so intimate with bodily functions can still fear the breath of a stranger. You pass a uroscopist's stall. Yes, that is exactly what it sounds like. A flasks of urine stand in a neat row like a chemist's stained glass choir. The practitioner swirls yours, squints, and pronounces it a little choleric, somewhat wind-smitten. He consults a colored wheel and recommends baked pears and moderate walking. Second gentle joke. It's like WebMD, except the search bar is a chamber pot. By afternoon, you've collected instructions like souvenir ribbons: avoid raw fruit, open your windows at noon, then close them against evening fogs, rub the chest with goose fat, sip posset at bedtime, milk warmed with ale, spice, and a coil of comfort wrapped in steam. You try it. The posset coats your throat, patient as a lullaby. Somewhere in the recipe is the same logic as your ruff and pattens, small practical defenses against an unruly world. You wander to the riverside where a pest house sits apart, meant for the sick poor. The sight chills you. A woman waves from a window, her face pale but determined. A boy brings broth and leaves it on a stool. Charity is a rhythm here, imperfect but persistent. Historians still argue whether municipal responses to plague represented genuine public health or merely panic management, yet you see threads of care stitched through the fear: rushes swept, vinegar splashed, prayers lifted, soup ladled. Back at the apothecary's, a student shows you a wonder cabinet. Narwhal tusk labeled unicorn horn, powdered mummy imported at great expense, and dragon's blood resin the color of bragging. You nearly choke on the last item's price. He demonstrates a test of bezoars with arsenic water, safely faked, he assures, and you applaud the theater. Third gentle joke. It's the Tudor TED Talk. Ideas worth swallowing. Please don't. Evening brings a barber's boy with a basin and steaming cloths. He sets a gentle cupping on your shoulders, draws out stagnant winds, and rubs a salve that smells of thyme and something brisk. Your skin prickles, then warms. You remember the lute's repetitive tune in the noble hall, the muttered Latin in church, the consonant clatter of market day. This, too, has a rhythm, a ritual that says, you will mend. Whether the science is sturdy or not, the kindness is a blanket. You settle by a small hearth with your posset and your rosemary, leeches retired, snails thank for their service. You think of the schoolmaster's rod, the court's pomanders, the market's nettled fish, the garderobe's draft. Every remedy in this world is also a story, a habit, a hope. The mainstream fact remains without microscopes. They treat balance, not bugs. Yet your body, which loves warmth and sweetness and rest, responds to the simple parts, the steam, tea, quiet. Before sleep, you smile at the barber pole through the shutter crack, its spiral catching the last light. Warning and welcome, comedy and cure. Maybe you wouldn't last a day in Tudor Britain on reason alone, but with a mug of posset, a sprig of a rosemary, and a neighbor who knows which leaf to steep and when, you might last the night. And sometimes, in any century, the night is the hardest part. The next morning begins with unease. You wake to distant bells tolling, not the steady rhythm of mass or market, but a sharper, anxious peal. A neighbor's face at the window is pale. He mutters the word everyone dreads, plague. Your stomach drops. You've only just survived snail paste medicine and bloodletting leeches, and now the great specter of Tudor Britain is knocking at the door. You shuffle into the street, and already things look different. Shutters are drawn on certain houses, chalk marks scrawl warnings across doors. A watchman slouches nearby, charged with making sure no one inside slips out. He leans on his staff, looking bored yet wary, the way someone might guard a box that could open into disaster. Mainstream fact, Tudor authorities often shut up infected households, locking families inside with food dropped at intervals. A crude quarantine meant as much to reassure neighbors as to save lives. People whisper as they pass. Some tie sprigs of herbs to their belts, rue, wormwood, rosemary, believing the smell wards off contagion. Others carry posies pressed to their noses like living pomanders. You remember the clove-studded oranges at court and realize that whether noble or poor, everyone breathes their fears through leaves and spice. Historians still argue whether this miasma theory, disease traveling in bad air, helped by encouraging cleanliness or hurt by ignoring fleas and rats. Either way, your own lungs feel cautious. You pass a house with its windows stuffed tight, garlic bulbs dangling like talismans. The family inside sings faintly, hymns rising through the cracks. A boy outside spits and mutters that they're cursed, then scurries away. Quirky tidbit. Some believe smoke itself could fight plague. Bonfires of herbs were lit in streets, filling the air with sage and juniper haze. You cough at the thought, imagining the city turned into one giant incense burner. At the market, the mood is strained. Fewer stalls stand open, and those that do space their goods wide. The fishmongers are absent entirely, their trade too closely tied to rot. Bread is sold quickly, coins dunked in vinegar before changing hands. You hand over a penny, dripping, and the baker shrugs, better wet than dead. First, gentle joke. Congratulations, you've just participated in Tudor contactless payment complete with vinegar sanitizer. Rumors fly faster than carts. Some insist the plague arrived on foreign ships. Others claim it's punishment for vanity or tavern sins. A preacher on a stool bellows that the end is near, his voice cracking with both fervor and fear. You edge past, unwilling to debate theology, while the smell of rosemary singes your nose hairs. Historians still argue whether plague sermons consoled or terrified more, but you're leaning toward terrified. You wander toward the riverside. The Thames looks sluggish, its banks cluttered with refuse, and you shiver imagining how many chamber pots have emptied here. A dead rat floats by, and you feel the universe wink at your naivety. The barber surgeon swore leeches could help. The wise woman gave you herbs. The truth floats belly up at your feet. In alleys, bodies are carried on carts, shrouded in rough cloth. A bellman follows, ringing to warn bystanders away. "Bring out your dead," echoes through narrow lanes, a phrase equal parts business and dread. You press yourself against a wall as the cart rolls past, stomach churning. The dog that once begged for scraps now whines at the shrouds, tail low. Second gentle joke. You realize Tudor pets were the only ones honest about their fear. At an apothecary's door, desperate buyers beg for theriac, unicorn horn, anything. Prices climb beyond reason. A woman clutches a small bottle, convinced it will protect her children. You want to believe with her. Quirky tidbit. Some people wore dead toads in bags around their necks, thinking the toad would draw the disease out. You watch a boy, proudly pat his amulet pouch and try not to imagine the squish. The night brings silence, broken only by the muffled cries from shuttered houses. Rushlights gutter in windows, faint as stars. You sit in your chamber, clutching rosemary sprigs, stomach knotted. Your mind drifts to the gargoyle in church, to the lute's endless tune, to the peacock pie on the noble table. Memories already tinged with fragility. Life here is quicksilver, bright one day, snuffed the next. Yet resilience remains. You overhear neighbors promising to leave bread for the quarantined. Children singing psalms in doorways, healers still mixing herbs with steady hands. Historians still argue whether these gestures slowed disease or simply gave people strength to face it. But strength matters. You sip posset, bittersweet, and feel a thread of calm. By dawn, bells toll again. The air smells of smoke, herbs, and fear. You realize you would not last a day in Tudor Britain, not because of violence or hunger, but because of this constant shadow, the awareness that plague could arrive with a flea bite, a handshake, or a breath. Third gentle joke, you mutter that Tudor Britain invented the world's worst surprise party, and no one ever wanted an invitation. You lie back on your straw mattress, rosemary tucked close, and whisper gratitude for the small things. Warmth, breath, a cup of weak ale. In Tudor Britain, survival is measured not in years, but in mornings when the bells are not for you. You wake to a quieter street, but not a kinder one. A small crowd gathers near the market cross, and the air has that alert tension you recognize from church whispers and court doorways. You slip between shoulders and see it. The stocks, patient as furniture, waiting with their twin slots of polished wood. Two apprentices already sit there, feet pinned, cheeks red with embarrassment and cold. Their crime was small, pilfered apples, a shove that turned into a scuffle. But here, small mischief earns public time. You stand back and feel how Tudor justice prefers spectacle to paperwork. A lesson is most effective when the whole town learns it with you. A constable in a wide-brimmed hat announces fines and future good behavior, voice calm as a clerk. Mainstream fact, local order lies largely in the hands of justices of the peace. Gentry who sit in quarter sessions, set wages, license alehouses, and dole out penalties from fines to time in the stocks. Above them, traveling assize judges sweep in twice a year like weather systems, trying serious cases and then gliding away, leaving villagers to co-parent justice the rest of the time. You picture law as a layered ruff. The high lace arrives for show, but the everyday linen does the real work. One of the boys in the stocks tries humor. He grins, calls out that he stole the apples to make a pie for the constable. A ragged cheer. Someone tosses him a crust. First gentle joke. Public humiliation seems to come with a catered snack. You note the social choreography, noisy, teasing, but careful. People punish with their eyes as much as with laws. A woman is led forward, chin set, dignity pinned like her coif. The beadle lifts a scold's bridle, iron framework with a small plate meant to rest against the tongue. You flinch. He doesn't put it on. Instead, he brandishes it as warning, a portable sermon against railing speech and slanders. Historians still argue whether the bridle saw wide use in Tudor England or was rarer here than in later Scottish towns. Even the threat is theater enough. The woman stands firm, absorbs a lecture, pays a fine with coins that clink like swallowed pride, and walks away, back straight as a pike. You drift with the crowd toward the river, where the cucking or ducking stool leans against a wall, wooden seat on a beam, more threat than routine. People murmur of a future testing, but today it stays dry. Some say the stool is for gossip or brawling, others for fraudulent bakers who shave loaves too thin. Historians still argue whether its Tudor use targeted mainly common scolds or became a catch-all for public nuisance. You breathe easier, no cold bath for anyone, at least not before lunch. Two parish officers stroll past with official swagger. One wears a badge that marks him as an ale taster, an ale conner, whose solemn duty is to ensure the brew isn't adulterated. Quirky tidbit. In London, tradition says the ale conner sits in a puddle of spilled ale, leather breeches his test kit. If he sticks after a while, the sugar content is honest. You imagine him lowering himself with grave dignity, then needing help to stand, and you almost forgive the century everything. Second gentle joke, quality control has never been so adhesive. Down an alley, a constable unrolls a parchment with names of sturdy beggars. Vagabonds' axe have sharpened over the reins, and the town means to discourage wandering laborers without masters. A few are warned, a few march toward work, one handed an earthen badge that says where he may beg. Historians still argue whether Tudor vagrancy laws were necessary responses to enclosure and harvest shocks, or blunt instruments that punished poverty itself. You watch a woman tuck her badge under her scarf, face set like a door against wind, and your pomander suddenly feels very small. Midday brings a hue and cry, literally. Voices rise, feet pound, and you are swept along as townsfolk chase a youth accused of snatching a purse. He darts between stalls, tips a basket of onions, vanishes, reappears, is cornered by a draper with surprising speed. No one reaches for steel. They reach for neighbors. Mainstream fact. Before paid police, the community enforces order. If you hear the cry, you're obliged to run. You run enough to impress your pattens, then slow as the tension dissolves into a scolding and a decision to bring the boy before the next session. Third gentle joke. Congratulations, you've done Tudor cardio. Chased justice in wooden overshoes. Outside the Guildhall, a small hearing convenes. A sergeant scratches notes while a justice, broad-shouldered, velvet-trimmed, listens with the patience of a man who has heard every story twice. Fines are set, sureties taken, and a promise extracted to avoid unlawful games and night walking. Night walking, you learn, is not exercise but suspicious loitering after curfew. You think of your modern midnight fridge raids and decide you would have a terrible record. A clerk whispers about benefit of clergy, that old legal door still not quite shut. If a first-time offender can read the so-called neck verse from the Psalms, he may be spared the worst penalties. Historians still argue whether this loophole saved learning or ruffs or merely privileged it. Either way, literacy here is more than status, it's insulation. You mouth miserere me Deus under your breath, just in case the day goes sideways. Near the pillory, a baker pleads that his loaves are of weight and lawful flour. The weigher sets his scale. The iron tongue declares truth with a tilt. Mainstream fact, food offenses draw swift public correction. The memory of famine makes honesty a civic duty. You remember your market morning and the nettle-rubbed fish, and feel a respectful shiver at the thought of being measured by metal. The baker passes, a cheer goes up, somewhere a dog gets a celebratory crust. Farther on, a rough music, pots banged, whistles blown, rattles from a lane. The community performs a charivari for a notorious brawler, parading him with clattering disapproval until he mimes contrition. You wince at the noise, smile at the outcome. Theater as therapy. Historians still argue whether such customs reinforced patriarchy or offered a rare outlet for common voices you only know your ears will be ringing until vespers. You visit the jail because curiosity is the coin you pay to this century again and again. It's small, stone, and damp, more holding pen than long-term punishment. Straw lines the floor. A turnkey jingles keys like a lullaby in the wrong key. Prisoners wait for trial, for fees to be paid, for time to pass with the bite of cold on their knuckles. You don't linger. The smell is a cousin of the guardrobe's draft you can't forget. As the afternoon lengthens, a procession crosses your path. A man led through the streets with a paper hat proclaiming his offense, libel against a neighbor. He reads aloud a confession written for him, voice breaking on the legal flourishes. The crowd murmurs, neither cruel nor kind, simply present. In Tudor Britain, shame is a shared instrument, tuned daily. Dusk edges the rooftops. The stocks stand empty now, wooden jaws closed like a lesson finished. You think of yesterday's bells and rosemary, of the poet at court reciting for favor, of the schoolmaster's rod tapping rhythms into benches. Everywhere, public life writes itself on bodies. Backs straight in ruffs, knees stiff from pews, wrists sore from quills, ankles smarting from pattens, tongues cautious from bridle warnings. Justice is not only what happens in rooms, but what echoes in lanes. You turn toward your lodging, passing the alehouse where laughter rises and the ale-conner practices his solemn craft with a suspiciously damp bench. The lute repeats its tireless 3 songs, and someone claps the rhythm on a tabletop. For a moment, the town feels gentle again. Hum, heat, and low talk. You clutch your small pomander, not for heirs now, but as a bead to count calm by, and whisper a wish that the night will pass without hue, without cry. Behind you, the pillory's silhouette thins into the blue. Ahead, your straw mattress waits, and the chamber pot lurks with its comic menace. You're learning the Tudor equation: fear eased by company, disorder answered by performance, law braided with local eyes. Whether it reforms or merely rehearses, historians still argue. You, lulled by the evening's hush, decide argument can wait. Tonight your ambition is simpler: to sleep without hearing a bell or a pot or lecture, and to wake with your neck verse unneeded and your pattens dry. The sun creeps through a gauzy haze, and you hear the creak of cartwheels before you see them. Travel beckons, though not the breezy kind you're used to. Here, movement across Tudor England is a slow, bone-rattling affair. A farmer offers you space in his cart headed toward the next town. You climb in, grateful for the ride, and immediately regret it. The cart floor is planks as hard as pews, and the suspension consists entirely of pray for level ground. The oxen lean into their yoke, hooves squelching through mud. The cart lurches forward, and you discover new muscles in your spine. Every rut feels like a minor earthquake. You cling to the edge, trying to look nonchalant as the farmer cheerfully describes the road's good condition. Mainstream fact: Tudor roads were often little more than compacted dirt, rutted by wheels, softened by rain. Bridges were few, ferries fickle. Parliament passed statutes requiring parishes to maintain highways, but enforcement was as spotty as the roads themselves. As you jolt along, a woman with baskets joins the cart, setting her chickens beside you. They cluck judgmentally, clearly disapproving of your balance. The woman explains she's off to sell butter and eggs, though half the eggs will likely break by arrival. You nod sympathetically, trying to steady her baskets with one hand and your own stomach with the other. First gentle joke: congratulations, you've discovered the Tudor core workout, planks while riding planks. The countryside unrolls around you, hedgerows thick with hawthorn, fields dotted with sheep, and the occasional timber house crouched by the lane. Inns appear every dozen miles or so, but they're rough shelters, not cozy coaching houses. Quirky tidbit: travelers often carried their own food, since inn fare was unpredictable, sometimes just a pot of communal pottage. You imagine unpacking your marchpane leftovers, then laugh at the thought: sugar survives rattles better than eggs. A rider passes, cloak billowing. His horse churns through the mud much faster than your oxen. You envy him briefly until you remember saddle sores. Historians still argue whether most long-distance travelers preferred horseback or cart. Either way, speed was measured in miles per hour you could count on one hand. Compared to your modern trains or planes, this feels like traveling backward through time. Literally, since the cart jolts so hard, you think your spine just regressed an inch. The farmer points to a milestone, a rough stone marker carved with distances. These guideposts are rare but welcome. You squint, wondering if you'll survive even that far. The woman beside you laughs, explaining that travelers often rely more on memory, gossip, and luck than markers. Ask at the next alehouse, she says, but don't trust a man with empty hands. He's more likely to send you astray for sport. You tuck that advice away, suspecting you'll need it. At a shallow river, the oxen pause, uncertain. No bridge here, just a ford. The farmer urges them on, water splashing into the cart, soaking your shoes. Cold bites at your ankles, and you remember the garderobe draft with a shiver. Second gentle joke: congratulations, you've invented Tudor water rides. Splash Mountain minus the fun. Once across, you jolt onward into woodland. Sunlight dapples the cart, and bird song filters through, momentarily soothing. But the woman mutters about highwaymen. Travel carries danger. Thieves lurk in forests, preying on carts too slow to escape. Mainstream fact: proclamations against vagabonds doubled as warnings against robbers. Sometimes entire gangs terrorized a region until a justice of the peace summoned men to hunt them down. You glance nervously at the shadows, clutching your rosemary sprig like a weapon. The road climbs a hill, and suddenly you glimpse the spire of another town ahead, rising like a needle from a green cushion. Relief floods you: civilization, or at least another cluster of mud, rushes, and ale. The oxen groan, the cart groans, and frankly, you groan. The chickens cluck triumphantly as though they carried you all themselves. Third gentle joke: you realize the real horsepower of Tudor travel is poultry morale. By the time you rattle into the town gate, your bones feel sorted into new positions. You dismount, wobbling like a sailor after a storm, and thank the farmer and his companion. They wave cheerfully, already discussing tomorrow's market, as if rattling teeth were simply the cost of living. You limp toward the inn, patten shoes squelching, wondering how anyone willingly traveled more than a few miles in this age. Yet for all the jolts, you've seen hedges blooming, fields alive, milestones standing silent, a spire beckoning. The land reveals itself slowly, mile by aching mile, until distance is no longer an obstacle but a rhythm. You step into the town grateful to stand still again and whisper that maybe surviving Tudor travel requires not strong carts or smooth roads, but strong patience. Your legs wobble from the cart ride, but your ears perk at a new sound, the rush of waves and the distant creak of rigging. The town you've stumbled into lies near the coast, and the sea, restless as gossip, beckons you forward. You follow salty air until it hits your nose like a slap, briny, fishy, yet invigorating after days of mud and pottage. Welcome to the Tudor seaside, where adventure smells like herring and tar. You step onto a beach littered with small boats pulled high above the tide line. Nets sprawl across the sand like gigantic cobwebs, gulls squawk indignantly overhead, and fishermen in rough wool tunics shout to each other while mending ropes. Mainstream fact, coastal towns thrived on fishing, especially herring, cod, and pilchard, much of it salted and barreled for trade. England's growing navy also depended on these shipyards, turning wood and tar into instruments of ambition. A boy offers you a bucket of oysters for a penny. You decline politely, still traumatized by mystery pies, though he slurps one raw to prove its merit. Quirky tidbit, oysters were so common they were considered poor people's food in Tudor England, not delicacies. You marvel at a world where oysters are the budget snack and bread is the real luxury. First gentle joke. Congratulations, you found the Tudor equivalent of instant ramen, slimy but filling. You wander to the shipyard, where half-built hulks loom like skeletons of whales. Men hammer planks into place, pitch bubbling in cauldrons to seal seams. The smell is sharp, acrid, mingling with sea spray until your nostrils surrender. An overseer explains proudly that the Crown's navy is expanding, Elizabeth determined to keep the Spanish in check. Historians still argue whether this burst of shipbuilding was more about defense or trade supremacy, but either way, the air thrums with purpose. Nearby, a group of sailors swagger through, their clothes ragged but spirits high. They sing a bawdy tune, words mostly lost under laughter. One pauses to boast about seeing the coast of France. Another describes storms that toss their ship like a child's toy. You nod, wide-eyed, pretending you're seasoned too, though your only nautical experience so far is nearly drowning in a puddle of chamber pot runoff. Second gentle joke. You consider bragging about that puddle as your own heroic sea tale. At the harbor wall, women gut fish with swift, practiced motions, knives flashing, scales glittering like accidental jewelry. Gulls dive dangerously close, rewarded with scraps. The women gossip while they work. One complains about her husband's gambling, another laughs about a cousin who tried to smuggle brandy under his doublet. You realize the seaside is not just labor, it's a theater of survival, where rumor and laughter carry as much weight as salt barrels. A merchant points out ships moored farther out, their masts swaying gently. He says one sails to the Low Countries with cloth, another returns from the Baltic with tar and hemp. You marvel at the invisible web stretching across oceans, all tied together by ports like this. Historians still argue whether Tudor England was truly a maritime power yet, or still an ambitious apprentice. From your vantage point, the ambition is loud, brash, and tar-stained. Suddenly a bell rings. People rush to the quay, murmuring about Spanish raiders spotted along the coast. Fear and excitement mix. The town has seen warnings before. Some men grab pikes, others haul barrels into safer storage. A woman mutters prayers while shoving her children indoors. You press against the wall, heart pounding. The sea is beautiful, yes, but it also delivers enemies as easily as fish. Mainstream fact, coastal towns lived with constant anxiety of raids, particularly during England's tensions with Spain and France. The alarm fades after an hour, false sighting, perhaps a merchant vessel mistaken for danger. Relief spreads in chuckles, the tension released like air from a wineskin. Sailors return to their drinking, women to their knives, gulls to their shrieking. Life resumes as though the scare was nothing more than a hiccup. Third gentle joke. You realize Tudor seaside raids were like bad weather alerts, sometimes thunder, sometimes just an angry gull. As evening settles, you walk along the shore. Children chase crabs, their laughter mixing with the tide's hiss. A man tunes a fiddle, striking up a jig while others clap and stomp on the sand. The salt air cools your face, the sun dips red over the water, and for the first time in days, you feel a clean breath fill your lungs. You linger, toes in the surf before trudging back inland. Your shoes squelch with sand, your cloak smells of fish, but your mind buzzes with images. Ships half built like giants, barrels stacked like fortresses, gulls wheeling like heralds. The Tudor seaside is no holiday retreat. It's an arena of work, fear, and laughter bound together by salt. You sigh, already bracing for tomorrow's inland mud, but for now, the sea keeps you company, humming its endless tune. You leave the salty clamor of the quay and drift inland until the air thins into green. A walled enclosure appears, brick, warm from the sun, a gate creaking you into quiet geometry. Inside, the world breathes in squares and scrolls. Paths of pale gravel wind around dark green borders, and the beds themselves are stitched into intricate ropes, true Tudor knots, their patterns looping and crossing like laces on a giant shoe. You step carefully, dew beads the edges, and your pattens click on shell grit, the clop-clop politely subdued. A gardener in a cap glances up from clipping box with shears that whisper. He nods, not unfriendly, and you nod back in the universal language of "I appreciate what you're pruning." The borders are thick with low box and Santolina, their leaflets tight as handwriting. Mainstream fact, knot gardens bloom under the Tudors, enclosed, geometric, meant to be admired from a terrace or a mount where symmetry reads like a page. Here, a raised bank lifts you above the design. You climb the spiral path and look down at green braids holding beds of gray gravel and scented herbs. From above, the garden is a compass, steadying your day after the seas wobble. Roses lean on stakes, their petals a little blousy, rain-kissed and complacent. Damask, apothecary, and a vigorous climber pretending the brick is merely a suggestion. The air is thick with gillyflowers. You'd call them cloves in a flower suit. Violets low and bashful. And rosemary, the old friend of breakfast. Church rafters and bedside comfort, standing like little evergreen sentries. You rub a sprig, the scent rises with the memory of posset steam and snails, politely declining to help a second time. You pause near a raised bed where the soil looks exceptionally, suspiciously rich. The gardener follows your gaze and grins. Fertilizer here is not a mystery. Ash from the kitchen, soot from the hearth, dung from the yard, and, let's be honest, contributions from guardrobes when pits are cleaned. Quirky tidbit. Some gardeners swear by soot tea, water steeped in ashes, while others recommend a touch of urine to wake a sluggish bed. Your pomander migrates toward your nose of its own accord. First, gentle joke. Congratulations, you've discovered the Tudor miracle grow, and you already walked through part of it last week. Beyond the knot stretches an orderly orchard. Young pears are trained flat against warmed brick, espaliered into lattices tidy enough to make a schoolmaster weep with joy. A row of quince sulks in fruitful dignity. Apples swell and blush in the late light. Historians still argue whether espaliered fruit was common in mid-Tudor gardens or a fashion that spread later, but these walls wear their trees like jewelry, and the sun does the rest. Bees bumble between blossoms still lingering on late varieties, their straw skeps clustered near a hedge. The head gardener tells you that when he must move a hive, he bangs a pan to let the village know, a drumbeat for bees and neighbors alike. You imagine the procession, pan, swarm, patience, and decide this is the most courteous parade on earth. Past the orchard stands a small mound, a mount, turfed and ringed with a snaking path. You climb again, grateful for the slow coil that spares your lungs. From the top, the garden lays itself out, knots neat as embroidery, orchard squares, a bowling green beyond, and at the far edge, a little banqueting house perched like a sugar cube. The gardener gestures proudly. From up here, the lord and lady survey their order, while outside the wall the world tries its best to be mud. Second gentle joke. It's the Tudor version of a tidy desktop. Drag chaos to the brick-walled recycle bin and admire your symmetrical files. On the bowling green, two gentlemen in slashed sleeves test the lawn with ritual seriousness, then roll their bowls with the care of men diffusing philosophy. A boy marks distances with a stick. A dog serves as impartial judge, nose exactly over the jack. Leisure here's measured. Archery butts line one wall for Sunday practice, a rhythm the law still loves to encourage, though the lure of bowls and cards tugs men from the targets. Mainstream fact, statutes long urged archery as national backbone. The bow's ghost still haunts the greens, even as new games swagger into fashion. You linger, enjoying the hush broken by soft thuds and polite groans. Under an arbor, ladies stitch while sharing a plate of candied peel left from some hall's dessert, a lingering sweetness that tugs you back to marchpane and peacock displays. Their talk flits from weather to woad dye, to which gilly flowers hold color best in a posy. One brings out a tiny cone of sugar like a precious tower, expensive, imported, carefully shaved into small luxuries. The garden, you realize, is an appetite with lees. It feeds the kitchen, perfumes the hall, supplies the apothecary's drawers, and stocks the still room with syrups and waters, rose, lavender, rosemary again, because rosemary is the Tudor version of we have it at home. A boy leads you along a path of crushed shells, a soft crackle underfoot, to a little maze of hedges. Not tall, just waist high, more play than prison. He dares you to get lost, and you oblige, circling until you find a stone bench in the center carved with vines. Historians still argue whether mazes truly belonged to Tudor days or arrived with more enthusiasm under the Stuarts. This, at least, is a prelude, a polite puzzle, fit for a stroll and a smile. You sit listening to bees skate through clover and a distant laugh from the green. The still room door stands ajar near the banqueting house. Inside, shelves carry glass alchemies, rose water beating on a bottle's throat, syrups resting like captured afternoons, a jar of candied angelica that smells faintly of optimism. The still-room mistress explains how to bathe a bruised elbow with comfrey, how to chase a cough with hyssop, and how to steep rosemary for courage, because you never know when you'll need it. You agree, in your last week you've needed courage more than socks. When the gate to the little banqueting house opens, you blink. The inner walls show painted fruit and flowers, bright as a market that forgot to smell like fish. Here, after meals, guests nibble banqueting stuff, sugarcraft, wafer, quince paste, comfits, away from the busy hall and its dogs. From the window, the knot garden looks like a piece of blackwork embroidery unfolded for admiration. The women below finish their stitching, and one holds her work to compare borders. Garden mirrors garment, garment mirrors garden, and everything mirrors order. By late afternoon, the gardener returns to his box edges, clipping them to a line so straight it could teach a sermon. He tells you about winter, evergreen bones holding shape after flowers sleep, mounts dusted with frost like sifted sugar, the bowling green stiff as a board but trodden for the principle of it. He speaks of pests, caterpillars, birds, and an especially rude rabbit, and remedies ranging from scarecrows to boys with slings. You ask about water. He shrugs at the well and muses about a conduit once planned. Historians still argue whether elaborate waterworks belonged mostly to royal gardens or occasionally trickled into great houses. Here, the practical triumphs. Buckets do the job. He also confesses, sheepish but smug, that he shapes a hedge into a peacock near the wall. You race to see it, a green bird frozen mid-strut, tail not quite fanned but suggestive enough to recall that feast where an actual peacock paraded as sculpture. Third gentle joke. Hedge peacock tastes better than the original, especially with no feathers between your teeth. You leave the garden with your shoulders unwinding. The air holds a perfume both stately and barnyard honest, rose and rosemary braided with compost and a memory of garderobe draft tamed into usefulness. Outside the wall, the lane slumps back into its old habits. Puddle, hoof, gossip. Inside, the knots rest like a solved riddle. Leisure here isn't idleness. It's tending edges until the whole day seems less likely to fray. As twilight drifts down, lamps blink alive in the banqueting house, and the bowling green fades to velvet. You tuck a sprig of rosemary behind your ear, why stop now, and feel like you've borrowed a little symmetry for your own cluttered hour. Nettled fish, peacock pies, market elbows, schoolroom rods, and chamber pot rivers all slide a step away. For the length of a garden, the century gives you order, and order, however hedged, is a kind of kindness. Night settles, but instead of sleep, you find yourself swept toward the noise of torches and shouting. The townsfolk cluster around a wooden pit, lanterns flickering against faces red with ale and anticipation. A bear is chained to a post, shaggy and restless, snapping at dogs that circle nervously. You blink, realizing this is entertainment, Tudor style, bear baiting, blood sport on a weekday evening. Mainstream fact, in London, bear baiting rings along the bankside drew crowds as eagerly as the theater. Kings and queens themselves sometimes attended, though moralists muttered that the spectacle belonged more to beasts than Christians. The bear lunges, the dogs scatter, the crowd roars. You wince, but the man beside you cheers, mug sloshing ale down his doublet. He offers you a sip, and you accept, because refusing seems ruder than animal cruelty. The ale is warm, flat, and strangely comforting. First gentle joke. Congratulations, you've found Tudor popcorn, served in liquid form, guaranteed to spill. After the bear tires, attention turns to other amusements. A juggler steps forward, tossing knives with reckless confidence. Children gasp, women clap, men shout wagers. His finale involves balancing a pewter plate on his nose while singing a psalm, which earns him both coins and laughter. Quirky tidbit: itinerant performers often combine tricks with religious recitation, as if juggling your way through a sermon might keep critics quiet. Historians still argue whether such shows were tolerated out of amusement or begrudged as disruptive, but here the line between faith and folly blurs cheerfully. Leaving the pit, you follow the noise into a tavern. Smoke hangs thick, candles sputter, and benches groan under the weight of villagers and sailors. A fiddler scrapes furiously in the corner, his bow sawing one tune over and over until your ears threaten mutiny. Men slap dice against the table, shouting numbers. Others clap in rhythm, their mugs serving as percussion. A woman with a voice like gravel belts a ballad about a miller's daughter who outsmarted the taxman. The chorus is bawdy, but you join anyway, the ale helping your courage. Second gentle joke. Karaoke has existed for centuries, only with more verses about sheep. The tavern keeper ladles pottage into bowls, sprinkles it with a few shreds of pork, and sets out trenchers. You eat slowly, grateful for warmth. Dogs lie under the benches, waiting for scraps. One licks your ankle approvingly. Around you, gossip swirls, complaints about grain prices, rumors of Spanish ships again, debates about whether the new preacher is too fond of his own voice. You nod at intervals, realizing taverns double as both recreation halls and neighborhood news networks. Later, the fiddler changes to a dance tune, and the benches scrape back. Pairs form, clumsy but enthusiastic, stomping and spinning. A young woman drags you into the circle, and suddenly you're part of the whirl. The steps are simple: forward, back, turn, clap. But the pace quickens, and soon your pattens click dangerously against the floorboards. You stumble, laugh, and somehow keep time. Third gentle joke. You invent Tudor Zumba, complete with shin splints and ale hydration. When the tune collapses in exhaustion, everyone cheers. Someone slams a jug of ale on the table, and mugs rise in toast. A man launches into another ballad, this one about a shipwreck, and half the room joins in, their voices thick with drink. The melody is plaintive, haunting, a reminder that laughter and loss live side by side in Tudor nights. Outside again, the streets echo faintly, with lute songs drifting from private houses. You peek through one open window and see a gentleman plucking delicately while his family hums along. Not all night entertainment is violent or rowdy. Some is intimate, hushed, meant to end the day with calm. Historians still argue whether such domestic music was widespread or confined to the middling and wealthy classes, but you catch the tune, soft and looping, and feel a rare hush in the air. You walk on, the torchlight behind you fading. The bear pit, the tavern, the fiddler's relentless bow, all blend into a single pulse of noise. Tudor nights may lack theaters lit by electric bulbs, but they do not lack theater. From chained bears to clattering dice, from ballads to jigs, from whispered gossip to soft lute chords, the night is a stage where every neighbor plays. By the time you return to your straw bed, ears ringing, stomach sloshing with ale, and heart still thudding from the dance, you know this much: sleep in Tudor Britain is never guaranteed. The world outside never really quiets. Entertainment doesn't stop at the door. It seeps through the walls, a restless, rowdy lullaby. You collapse anyway, laughter still buzzing in your bones, hoping the bear doesn't growl in your dreams. Dawn drags you awake again, and this time you don't follow men to markets or nobles to feasts, you follow women. You've seen them in corners of taverns and gardens, glimpsed them singing ballads or mending sleeves, but today you stay close, watching the rhythm of their lives. It begins with laundry, and nothing in Tudor Britain is so deceptively gentle. At the riverbank, women kneel on planks, pounding linen with paddles until your arms ache in sympathy. Buckets of lye soap froth faintly, the caustic sting filling your nose. The water's cold, biting enough to numb fingers before the day has even warmed. Yet they laugh, joke, and scold children splashing too near. Mainstream fact, laundry was rarely a daily task, too grueling. So wash days were full-scale events, entire households' clothing scrubbed, beaten, rinsed, and dried in communal labor. First, gentle joke. You realize Tudor laundry was the original group fitness class. Scrub, lift, wring, repeat. Beside the washers, another woman tends a steaming pot, stirring cloth in a brew of urine and ash. Yes, the same miracle concoction that fullers use for wool. She assures you it whitens linen like nothing else. You pretend admiration, clutching your rosemary sprig tighter than ever. Quirky tidbit, urine was so valuable that some towns taxed it as a commodity. Suddenly you see chamber pots in an entirely new and unwelcome light. When the washing is spread on hedges to dry, you trail into a cottage kitchen. Here, a midwife prepares her satchel, linen cloths, swaddling bands, and small jars of herbs. Pennyroyal, fennel, savory. She explains births may call at any hour, so she keeps herself ready, summoned by neighbors more quickly than by priests. Historians still argue whether Tudor midwives wielded real authority or were tightly overseen by parish officials, but her calm hands speak of experience stronger than paper. You sip her nettle tea politely while she recounts a delivery last week where the father fainted before the child cried. Second gentle joke. You note that fainting fathers seem to be a Tudor constant across centuries. The day continues with spinning. A group of women sits together, distaffs tucked under arms, fingers pulling wool into thread. The wheel hums, steady as a heartbeat. Their talk hums too. Who quarreled at market? Which preacher looks kindly at which widow? Whether the frost will spoil the beans? Work is never silent. It's laced with gossip that weaves as surely as the wool. Mainstream fact, spinning was such a defining task that spinster came to mean an unmarried woman. Here, it simply means another set of hands feeding the household. Later, you watch one tend a still room. Bottles glint in half-light, rosewater for fevers, comfrey for bruises, chamomile for sleep. The room smells of sweetness and smoke, a miniature apothecary within the home. A child whines with earache, and the mother warms oil with garlic, dripping it gently. You hold your breath, amazed at the tender precision. Historians still argue whether such remedies were effective medicine or comforting ritual, but you see how comfort itself is part of the cure. At noon, a group prepares bread. Flour dusts the air, dough slaps the table. The loaves are dense, brown, solid as stones. Children hover, hoping for a crust. A woman smirks at you and says, "You won't last here if you don't learn to knead." You oblige, pressing into the dough until your wrists ache, and everyone laughs at your awkward rhythm. Third gentle joke, you proudly announce you've invented Tudor Pilates, only to be told it's just bad bread making. Afternoon brings more burdens. Water must be hauled from the well, heavy buckets biting into hands. Firewood is split, herbs gathered, rushes cut for floor strewing. A woman explains that rushes are changed not nearly as often as you'd hope, their perfume courtesy of lavender or mint scattered on top. You nod politely, determined never again to complain about vacuuming. Toward evening, the midwife is called. You hurry behind her, heart racing. In the cramped cottage, women gather round the laboring mother, their voices soft, their hands steady. No men enter. This is women's space, urgent and sacred. Hours stretch. The cries rise and fall. At last, a child's wail slices the air, and relief floods the room. The midwife wraps the baby, the mother exhales, and the neighbors murmur blessings. Quirky tidbit. Sometimes butter or honey was rubbed on the newborn's lips as a first taste of sweetness. Tonight, it's honey, gleaming like sunlight in the dim room. Afterward, exhausted but smiling, the women share ale, raise a toast, and slip back into their chores. You step out into the cool night, stunned by their endurance. They washed, spun, baked, birthed, soothed, and still they laugh. Historians still argue whether Tudor women's labor was invisible drudgery, the unacknowledged backbone of society. Watching them now, you feel the answer is both and more. Their burdens are endless, but their threads weave the whole fabric of Tudor life. You head to bed, body heavy with borrowed fatigue, ears still echoing with women's laughter over laundry, gossip spun with wool, a baby's first cry. For one day you've seen Tudor Britain through their hands, and you know you wouldn't last a week. You wake with an honest hunger that only a breakfast of yesterday can answer. In Tudor Britain, the calendar of your stomach is written in salt, smoke, vinegar, and barrels, the quiet technologies that teach food to wait. If you cannot preserve, you cannot eat come winter. If you cannot stretch, you cannot feast in spring. You step into a cool passage off the kitchen, where a thick-doored larder sighs chill air, and the stone floor reads like a recipe for patience. Hooks dangle from beams. Shelves carry wheels of cheese in various moods. A cask shoulders the corner with the stoicism of a monk who's seen it all. A cook with flour on her cheek flips back the latch. Inside, sides of bacon hang, striped like little sunsets. Strings of onions bead the air with their slow sweetness. A bouquet of herbs dries above, the rosemary inescapable. Church rafters, medicine chest, garden knot, and now the pantry. You run a finger along a rind of cheese the color of baked bread. She warns you off. New cheeses go first, older ones march to winter. The mainstream fact is simple and relentless. Preservation is the engine of the Tudor kitchen. Salting, smoking, pickling, drying, potting. These verbs keep bellies steady when fields sleep. She lifts a lid from a stone pot. Beneath a thick, salted top gleams potted beef packed in clarified butter, sealed from air like a message waxed shut. Another jar holds wet salt fish, haddock cured in brine, ready for the pan once you chase the excess salt with a long soak. The smell nudges your memory of the market's eel and the seaside's oyster pails, but this is calmer, cooler, a promise rather than a shout. Quirky tidbit, bakers make huge, tough-walled pies, coffins, whose inedible crust serves as a clay jar, keeping spiced meats safe for days or weeks. You recall the noble hall's staring egg pie and forgive it slightly. Beneath the spectacle was a sensible vault. The brewer's boy shoulders in with a grin and a splintered stave. He's come for yeast, and the cook trades a jug of yesterday's barm for the favor of a fresh pitcher of small beer at noon. If the Tudor house is a body, the ale house is its circulation, and barrels are the arteries. You follow him out to the buttery, the room named for butts, the great barrels, not dairy, and he thumps a cask like a doctor tapping a rib. Second gentle joke, quality control today is percussion. If it echoes right, you prescribe 2 pints and a nap. Here comes a plain truth that would confound your modern pantry. Most households live on some form of ale or small beer. Water's not trusted, ale is boiled in the making and kept moving through the day. Children drink it weak, workers stronger by the noon pottle. Historians still argue whether everyday Tudor ale was consistently low in alcohol or drifted higher than we imagine. The only certainty is that it accompanies nearly everything, a liquid loaf that keeps company with salted fish and crumbly cheese. You raise a mug at dinner and understand why an ale connor's sticky benches matter. If the brew goes wrong, the day does too. The cook takes you to the smokehouse, a little black chapel where the sermons are written in soot. Hams and fish sway like patient congregants, the air readable with weeks of smoldering oak and apple. Kippers wink bronze. Bacon sleeps into itself. Eels, split and hooked, look resigned to their afterlife as supper. She feeds the fire with damp wood chips so the smoke stays cool, and you breathe in the same perfume that clung to the shipyard, Tar's cousin, only here it ends in dinner instead of war. Out by the salting bench, a man works in a glittering drift of salt. A side of beef is rubbed, layered, laid in a tub that gleams like snowdrift. Salt costs, but hunger costs more. He explains the rhythm. Cure for days, rinse, hang, then stew it long to wake tenderness. You imagine winter and the pot that must sing all morning to convince a salted cut to be kind again. First gentle joke. Tudor Britain's favorite seasoning is thyme, best sprinkled by the hour. Fish days shape the week like pegs on a coat rack. Even after the old church rules loosen under reforming hands, Fridays and certain holy days still lean toward fish, and the sea answers with herring, cod, ling, and the famous stiff plank of stockfish you have to hammer before you can even think of cooking it. Mainstream fact, religious lean days bolster fisheries and trade. Whether from piety or policy, people chew the ocean often. Historians still argue whether enforcement wanes evenly across the century or lingers stubbornly in certain towns. Your jaw hopes for leniency whenever stockfish appears. In the still room you watched yesterday, jars of pickle and verjuice stand like green and golden moons, vinegar bristling with peppercorns, crab apple juice sour enough to scold a stew into brightness. These aren't just flavors, they're passports, carrying summer into winter. Cabbage shreds curl under brine. Onions sleep in spiced vinegar. Mushrooms hide in a dark bath with mace and cloves, waiting for a cold day when the pan aches for companions. You think of the baker rinsing coins in vinegar during plague season and realize this acid is a double citizen, culinary and sanitary, sharp on tongue and conscience. Bread returns to the table as the reliable backbone. Wheaten loaves for the well-off, maslin, mixed grains for most, rye for the stubbornly poor or northern. Old bread cubes into pottage, crisped into sippets to fairy broth, or ground into crumbs for binding. If it goes too far, there's a hen outside who will turn yesterday's loaf into tomorrow's egg. Cheese arrives beside it, the older wheels deeply flavored and sometimes moodily green around the edges. A servant's joke claims that mold is a spice of its own. You decline to adopt the seasoning officially. When the year turns cruel, people turn to barrels. Herring packed in neat ranks like soldiers, salted beef as red and stern as a sermon, butter pounded with salt and tucked into crocks beneath a slick of brine to keep it honest. In good houses, a cool dairy room rules over cream, skim, and curds with chalkboard organization. In most houses, it's a shelf by a north wall and a prayer to St. Chill. Historians still argue whether improvised cellars in crowded cities held steady temperatures or betrayed their owners with sudden thaws. A careful cook listens to stone, tests air with her wrist, and trusts experience more than charts. Hardtack, ship's biscuit, enters the scene when travel or provisioning demands a bread that chooses immortality over charm. You bite one corner and learn why sailors treasure teeth. Dipped in ale, it softens from cudgel to chew, and you forgive it enough to be grateful on a rain-stung road. Third gentle joke, you call it chew-tur-proof, and the brewer's boy groans as if you've salted language itself. Spices, intriguingly, belong here not just for luxury but for labor. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, long pepper, grains of paradise, these not only flatter the salted and the old, they soothe the nose where smoke has shouted too long. Mustard hammers blandness back to life, made with ground seed and verjuice, fierce enough to make your eyes water and your heart apologize. The cook grins and says mustard was invented for winter and men who boast. You pretend to take notes for both categories. In a corner of the yard, racks of apples dry into leathery quarters. Near them, plums squint into prunes. If frost is kind, you'll taste summer in January. If not, a handful tossed into pottage lends grace to an otherwise honest bowl. You think of laundry day, wring, beat, rinse, and see the same cycles in food. Salt, smoke, soak, stew. Everything is effort deferred. Everything is future planning disguised as today's chore. Even the dog under the bench participates in preservation, burying a precious bone near the hedge for later. You watch him pat the earth solemnly and can't help admiring the cross-species strategy meeting. Then the bell for supper rings, and you head in through the buttery where casks breathe cool and a line of coffins bristles with pastry crenellations. The room smells like a treaty between farm and fire. At table, the trenchers come out and the ladle does its patient work. A bowl of salted beef and peas thick as reassurance, a platter of pickled onions bright enough to cut fog, a slice of cheese that remembers May. You lift your mug of small beer, the cook nods, and you take a long pull. Everything here teaches the same lesson in different grammars. Keep, hold, wait, tend. If the market was a shout and the court a whisper, the larder is a hum. Steady, frankly domestic, and absolutely necessary. Later, as candles gutter and the larder door shuts with its promising thump, you understand why the garden's order felt like kindness. Preservation is just order with a taste. The rosemary behind your ear, the vinegar on your tongue, the salt in your dreams, they are all small walls against winter. In Tudor Britain, you survive by building these walls every day, one jar, one ham, one barrel at a time. And if your jaw learns to love stockfish, well, historians still argue whether anyone's jaw ever truly loves stockfish. Yours is content to agree to disagree over a second ladle of peas and a forgiving cup of ale. You are pointed toward a doorway banded with gold paint, and your stomach tightens the way it did before the schoolmaster's rod. This is no ordinary supper. This is dining in public, the royal style, a theater where knives sparkle like dialogue and every crumb tells on you. An usher guides you to a bench far closer to the dais than you deserve. You sit too close to nobles, close enough to smell their rose oil, close enough to wonder whether your faithful sprig of rosemary is brave or simply underdressed. Pages in livery surge and eddy like a practiced tide, carrying platters with a choreography that would impress the bowling green. Hand washing begins, basins and ewers glide, linen napery is offered, and a scented splash, probably rosewater, possibly liquid courage, runs over your fingers. Mainstream fact, because forks aren't yet common at English tables. You eat with knife, the spoon, and carefully washed fingers, hence the ritual at the start and finish. You keep your hands exquisitely exemplary, while the yeoman of the ewery, lord of clean water and table linen, gives a satisfied nod that says, your fingers are now part of the furniture. The high table gleams, salt cellars squat like miniature castles, glittering frontiers between ranks. Above the salt and below the salt made visible in silver. Manchet bread, fine, white, proud, waits by each place, while coarser household loaves sulk farther down. A sewer, the officer, not the tunnel, directs courses with a baton of authority, and the cupbearer kneels to present wine, having first sipped and thus signed his own risk away. Quirky tidbit, the carver's art keeps a glossary for animals: frush a chicken, spoil a hen, sauce a capon, disfigure a peacock. Terms as mannered as dance steps, each cut announcing learned hands. You practice cutting bread politely, which mercifully carries no special verb. Trumpets peal, a hush folds the hall. Whether the sovereign dines here or in private tonight, the choreography remains. Faces poised, backs lifted, eyes disciplined. You study your trenchers, stale bread for some, pewter for others, and repeat to yourself, do not begin before those above you. Do not reach across. Do not wipe your fingers on the tablecloth unless you long to become local theater. First, gentle joke. You murmur the rules like a bedtime spell. No elbows, no eagerness, no inventing forks. And feel your shoulders lower a notch as if etiquette itself were a lullaby. The first course arrives with the soft thunder of plenty. Pottages steam from deep bowls, roast beef glistens, capons lounge in mustard. A fritter dusted with sugar threatens to snow on your lap. Sugar, that bragging iceberg, floats through everything. You sip claret that hums of oak and ambition, and your trencher sighs as it drinks up sauces. From the minstrel's gallery, a tune prances just fast enough to keep your jaw from locking in awe. A sleek dog, aristocratic by association, studies you without begging, and still collects a morsel from someone farther up the bench. Then spectacle. A pie tall as a turret is carried to the dais, its crust gilded, little chimneys breathing spice. The steward taps the lid. Inside, a surprise. Live birds flutter upward, a party trick with medieval roots that somehow keeps its feathers in the 16th century. Gasps, laughter, a few heroic rescues of panicked sparrows from rafters. Historians still argue whether such subtleties graced Tudor boards often or were rare echoes of older fashion. Tonight they feel inevitable, like thunder after heat. Your eyes chase feathers while your hands remember to be tidy. And then, the peacock, reassembled and resplendent. The cooked body wears its own iridescent armor, beak gilded, tail fanned as if pride survived the oven. You are overwhelmed by peacock pies before a single slice leaves the platter. A noble smiles when your sliver arrives, more symbol than sustenance. You chew carefully, because dignity is a seasoning. Second, gentle joke. You decide peacock mostly tastes of story, with top notes of "Please don't tell the cook." Between courses, the almoner collects trenchers heavy with juices to be given later at the gate. Charity braided into ceremony. Mainstream fact, leftovers at great houses often became structured alms, feeding poor neighbors and polishing reputations in one motion. The rushes underfoot are freshened with a scatter of lavender and mint, and the peacock's perfume yields to gardens and soap dreams. You remember not garden paths and think this is their edible cousin, geometry plated and devoured in order. More dishes arrive like arguments for variety: a swan's collar set in pale jelly, venison sauced the green of orchard shade, a pike presented in his proper shape, head cocked in vexed immortality. Subtleties follow: marchpane castles with banners of spun sugar, a St. George so delicate you fear breathing near him, comfits rattling like sweet hail in a pewter bowl. You take one and regret nothing. Quirky tidbit: marchpane doubles as dessert and diplomacy. Messages can be written in colored sugar, and the right motto sweetens both palate and policy. Etiquette becomes its own course. Knives angle toward you like obedient swans. Napkins live over the shoulder. Bread is torn, not sliced. When the shared cup returns, you touch it with both hands because someone swore that looked respectful, and you are committed to surviving this with vertebrae intact. The gentleman to your left murmurs a compliment on your restraint. You bow while promising your stomach that a private oat binge may follow. Third gentle joke: courtly appetite is a performance review. Shows promise, seeks seconds and own time. A poet recites while a lute draws neat loops under his voice. The verse praises a lady's eyebrow with such architectural detail you suspect building codes will apply. Smiles all around. The poet bows. A platter of quince paste arrives to rescue the room from metaphor. You spread a little on manchet and discover a treaty between fruit and sugar worthy of ratification. The cupbearer returns with hypocrites, spiced wine, warm as approval. You imagine the still room where its syrups began, rose and cinnamon whispering to each other over low flames, and your shoulders remember how to unclench. Across the hall, a page stumbles. A ripple of amusement, then silence as he recovers with a bow so perfect it might have been starched. Starch, you feel your ruff counseling your spine again, that wearable manners coach from the fashion chamber. Bread rises to your mouth. You pause until the sovereign tastes, then follow a heartbeat later. Timing is an instrument here. You are the newcomer learning to play soft. A whisper reaches you about the Eltham ordinances, household rules that once tried to tidy this vast machine. Whether they truly tamed waste or merely renamed it, historians still argue. Tonight the gears turn with oily grace. Officers move like clockwork: panter for bread, butler for wine, ewerer for water, titles that sound like verbs because they are. You sip, you nod, and you try very hard not to baptize your doublet in gravy. Toward the end, the hall tilts towards sweetness. Wafers arrive hot and fragile, steam curling like calligraphy. The void is proclaimed, hypocrites again. Wafers, perfumed breaths, a polite dismissal of heaviness. Those invited drift to a closet or, in fine weather, to that little banqueting house you loved in the gardens, where sugar and talk finish what meat and policy began. You are not invited, you are relieved. Your jaw needs a holiday. On the way out, you pass the scullery's heat, where the true battle took place. Spits turned by boys whose arms will never cool, cauldrons big enough to mother a storm. Grease slicks the bricks, steam toys with the rafters. A cook wipes her brow with the clean corner of an apron and grins at your wide eyes. Too close to the dais, were you, she says. You confess you were seated in the splash zone of glory. She snorts, ladles you a quiet spoon of broth, and that, more than peacock perfume, feels like favor. Outside, the night air is a balm. Beeswax and roast smoke, lavender and clove, laughter echoing down stone. You hand your napkin back to the liveried boy who lent it, whisper thanks to the unseen hands that turn mountains into courses, and examine your trembling fingers. You have dined and survived. The rosemary at your collar smells suddenly confident. You walk carefully, determined not to stain your last clean linen with gravy or awe. Behind you, the president's chamber exhales, servants turning grandeur back into rooms. Ahead, your straw bed negotiates with your aching feet. You think of the market's onions and the cottage's pottage, of women spinning and a baby's first sweet lick of honey. Feasts may define a realm, but they do not feed it. Tomorrow barrels and bread resume their soft dictatorship. For tonight, though, you have learned the court's lullaby, silver, sugar, ceremony, and the small mercy of broth at the door. You wake to a sky the color of pewter and a smell of wet soil that sneaks under doors like a polite intruder. The bell you hear isn't church. It's a handbell rattled down the lane, and men and women begin to drift toward the fields in a quiet parade of wool and wooden handles. You follow, feet already heavy with yesterday, and step off the track into the open fields, the great common quilt stitched in long, narrow strips. Your neighbors point out their pieces of the patchwork, 3 ridged ribbons to one man, 5 to another, all scattered like a card trick the land has been performing for generations. Mainstream fact: the open field system breaks holdings into strips across shared fields, one usually in wheat or rye, one in barley or oats, one lying fallow. So risk and benefit spread across the village instead of piling on one unlucky corner. Someone hands you a hoe with a handle polished by a century of palms. Mind the furrow, a woman says, and you step along the ridge, breaking weeds that pretend to be wheat's cousins. The earth gives with a soft sigh your back does not. Oxen plod past, a plow behind them creaking like an old hymn. The plow isn't sleek iron. It's stubborn wood, with an iron share at its teeth, the sort of tool that believes in character building. The plowman clicks his tongue. The boy at the goad gently persuades the team to pretend a straight line exists. You admire the furrow behind them, dark as new ink, neat as a schoolmaster's pride. And then you glance at your row and realize your line meanders like a ballad after ale. First gentle joke, you call it a picturesque furrow, which is farmer for please don't look too closely. The field talks and tools. Sickles hang from belts like smiles with sharp opinions, bill hooks right under arms for hedging. Mattocks squat near the ditch like square-headed dogs. A man shows you the flail used for threshing, 2 sticks joined by leather, folk music for grain. Swing, thump, scatter until the ears give up their treasure. He grins and says he hears the rhythm in his sleep. You nod and resolve not to nap near a granary. A girl walks the boundary with a clapper of wood, chasing birds and a percussion conversation that the rooks understand all too well. Quirky tidbit: some villages keep a tame goose as a weeder turned into the herbs and peas to nibble the wrong greens and leave the right ones. You watch a scowling gander march a row like a corporal on parade and decide he's the foreman you didn't know you feared. Season sets the script. In early spring, the plow opens ground. In late spring, beans and peas go down like small green promises. Summer builds hay into ricks shaped like patient loaves. Late summer draws the sickles, reaping, binding, stooking sheaves in little teepees to shed weather. Autumn walks the fields with a flail and a prayer. Winter mends hedges, repairs carts, scours tools with sand until handles glow the way only hard work can polish. In between, there's manure, and you already know its biography too well. Muck from the byre, ash from the hearth, a wink from the garderobe pit when the time is right. You tuck your pomander near your mouth and think fondly of Rosemary's ambitious CV, church, bed, garden, medicine, and now battlefield aromatherapy. At the far edge of the field, a broad-backed barn opens like a jaw. The tithe barn, its great doors shrugging the day. A 10th sheaf stacks there for the parish. Tithe paid in grain that will become bread for clergy, poor relief, and occasionally the mice who maintain a vigorous spiritual life. You carry a bundle inside, the air cool and dust sweet, motes turning like shy comfits in a beam of light. The reeve ticks marks on a tally and clears his throat with the importance of a man whose pen is also a stick. Mainstream fact: most villages govern themselves through manorial courts and officers, reeve, Hayward, constable, who balance custom and prescription the way a plow balances weight and soil. Not every day in the fields is quiet. Rumors drift on the wind like thistle seed, fences creep where commons once sprawled, hedges stand like new laws. A gray-bearded man says sheep have grown teeth long enough to eat men, his bitter shorthand for enclosures. Historians still argue whether enclosures in mid-Tudor years were the main driver of unrest, dear food, and wandering labor, or whether hunger's tangle owed more to population bulge and price spirals. You note only this: the hedges bruise your shins and the talk bruises your heart. You break for a bite near noon, a slab of rye bread, a corner of cheese, practicing to be antique, a knob of onion, and a pull of small beer that tastes like harvest in liquid. Someone passes a little pot of mustard fierce enough to frown at the sky. You sprinkle a pinch of salt like a blessing and notice the ruts of your hands, streaked with earth nicked by straw, perfumed faintly with sheep. Second gentle joke. Congratulations, you've discovered a Tudor cologne. Notes of lanolin, oak smoke, and please don't sit too close. Back to it. You learn to lay sheaves with their ears aligned, to twist tough straw into bands that hold, to set shocks so wind kisses and doesn't kick. The sun remembers its job and presses lightly. A cloud slides over like mercy. On the next strip, a cottager's wife stoops with a willow basket. She's gleaning, the right of the poor to collect what the reapers miss. Her hands move like small birds. She thanks the steward out loud, and the reapers with a loaf later. You tuck that rhythm into your pocket with the rosemary sprig. Give, take, tend, return. When the cart comes, it's a wooden ship with hay for sails, swaying on ruts loaded by forks that lift like oars. The carter stands proud, goad in hand, as if commanding the navy you sniffed at the coast yesterday. A boy rides the load, tamping with a gentle bounce that probably terrifies his mother and thrills him to the bone. Out by the lane, the Hayward eyes hedges and ditches, counting sheep with the deadly focus of a man who knows the fine for stray mouths. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, the rural equivalent of all hands. Toward evening, a shower pretends to be nothing, then tries to be everything. Reapers move like a single creature, binding faster, standing stooks more tightly, pulling the field into little tents that shed the worst of it. The smell lifts, wet straw, bruised green, a sweetness that finds the back of your throat. You help haul two last shocks upright and feel a fierce small pride when the rain runs off like reason. The steward nods the way a schoolmaster nods at a neat line of Latin. You glow a little hotter than the weather explains. Work ends, but the day doesn't. In the alehouse later, harvesters nurse mugs and ankles, while a fiddler tests whether your legs remember jigs. Someone speaks of harvest home, the feast when fields are cleared, a corn doll made from the last sheaf, the wagon dressed with flowers, neighbors fed until the dark forgets to be solemn. Historians still argue whether the exact customs you hear belong strictly to this decade or drift between centuries like tunes, but the spirit, labor wrapped in thanksgiving, feels older than hedges and newer than your ruff. Third gentle joke. When the fiddler asks what you bring to the feast, you say appetite and a crooked furrow, and he declares that's legal tender after a long day. You hobble out to the night with straw still clinging to your hose. Over the fields, the last light makes each stook a small chapel, pointed and still. An owl writes its soft signature across the lane. A fox argues briefly with a hedge. You take a breath that tastes of cut things and wet earth, of tin mug and onion, of the world before sugar castles and peacocks in armor. On the threshold of your lodging you pause, looking back toward the darkness where oxen sleep and the tithe barn holds its tenth like a promise. The open fields blur into a single patient idea. Shared risk, shared work, shared bread. Tomorrow will ask the same price, backs, hands, time, and pay in smaller coins. A neat furrow, a dry stook, a nod from someone whose nod matters. You loosen your points, slide your pattens aside, and tuck the rosemary sprig onto the sill where breeze can find it. If you wouldn't last a day at court without etiquette, you wouldn't last a day here without weather and neighbors. Both are fickle, both are necessary. You lie down with straw memories in your hair, and the flail's rhythm still in your wrists. The world hums. Market, church, court, garden. But tonight the hum belongs to fields, slow, granular, and unglamorous, the note beneath everything. Sleep noses at the door like a curious goose. You grin, forgive his earlier authority, and let him in. Dusk leaks over the hedges like watered ink, and the lane begins its nightly conversation with shadows. You walk slowly, straw still hitchhiking on your hose, when a woman ahead of you pauses at a threshold to touch iron, just the nail head on her door before stepping inside. She glances back, smiling as if to say, "Can't be too careful." You touch the nail too, and the exchange feels like borrowing a neighbor's umbrella from the weather you can't see. Someone rattles a bell in a garden to shoo birds from beans, a sound that also seems to rinse the air of worry. You realize that here, a day's work never quite ends. It just changes tools, from hoe and flail to charm and sign. A boy darts past with a bundle of twigs tied in a neat hex, something his grandmother swears keeps nightmares from wedging themselves in the rafters. He calls it a house knot and tucks it under the thatch with the authority of a foreman goose. Inside the next cottage, you catch a whiff of rosemary, your oldest companion in this century, burning in the hearth to sweeten the room after guests. Mainstream fact, in Tudor England, miasma, the idea that bad airs carry sickness, guides everyday life, so scents and smoke stand guard at doors as honestly as latches and dogs. You breathe in the rosemary and lemon peel and think of pomanders at court, the apothecary's jars, and posset steam. Same impulse, different rooms. First gentle joke, you decide Rosemary has earned a promotion to head of household security, wages payable in compliments. At the market cross, a peddler lays out amulets, little Saint medals, pewter hands, tiny bags of salt. He offers you a charm stitched with blue thread against the evil eye, then lowers his voice to sell a horseshoe sung over by a prior. The shoe is ordinary iron with the glamour of a story. Quirky tidbit, archaeologists sometimes find single shoes tucked under Tudor hearths and thresholds, likely left on purpose to snag wandering mischief. A household's lost soul is a household's kept soul. You don't buy the horseshoe, you already collect too many talismans, but you turn yours in your pocket, the rosemary stem pretending to be iron when necessary. A cat steps out of the alley, black as a good hat, eyes like polished peas, and crosses your path. Everyone freezes for half a heartbeat. Then the miller's wife laughs. She's my mouser, not the devil's niece, and scoops the cat up. Historians still argue whether fear of black cats was a widespread Tudor reflex or a later exaggeration pinned backward by gossip. In this street, the superstition and the affection share a bench. The cat yawns, a pink punctuation mark, and the spell breaks. You scratch her chin and move on, guilt soothed by purrs. Second gentle joke. You whisper to the cat that if she is a witch, you'll accept 2 extra lives on credit. A knot of neighbors gathers around a carpenter who is carving little sunbursts into a lintel. The lines spiral and loop like the knot garden you loved, except these flowers are carved to trap badness. Daisy wheels, apotropic doodles to make anything wicked chase its own tail. Stops the night from coming in with the draft, he says. Shh. You watch the chisel bite, wood curls falling like peel from an apple, and you feel the threshold grow, teeth-friendly ones. Inside, a mug of ale waits, and a crust of cheese stands guard on a shelf like a sentry that snacks. You step into the room as an older woman ties a red thread around a child's wrist to hold his luck from running off. She shows you a tiny bottle stoppered with wax, half full of something brown. For the chimney, she says, pins and hair and a bit of water. A witch bottle, you realize, urine, pins, nail clippings, buried to confuse any curse that might come nosing through the smoke. Historians still argue whether such bottles began in this century or brewed up later with more fervor. The impulse feels older than the roof, to turn the house into a quiet fortress with clay and superstition. You set your cup down carefully, as though loud movements might shake the wax. Talk slides as talk will to witchcraft. Mostly nonsense, a man says too quickly, but keep your butter churn sweet. Another nods solemnly and swears that if butter won't come, a hot poker in the cream will drive out the thief of luck. You picture a feisty spirit with singed eyebrows fleeing the churn and vow never to quarrel with dairy. Mainstream fact. Statutes against sorcery bookend the dynasty. Henry VIII's 1542 Act briefly made witchcraft a capital crime before repeal, and Elizabeth I's 1563 law punished harmful conjurations and dealings with spirits. Yet most Tudor communities still lean first on cunning folk, local healers and charmers whose cures for bewitched cows outnumber court indictments. Historians still argue whether prosecutions rose because belief sharpened or because anxieties about harvests and neighbors needed a courtroom to breathe in. Later, the village wise man steps in, a cousin to the wise woman who doctored you with snail paste and nettles. He carries an almanac folded like a secret, moons, saints' days, lucky hours for planting and bloodletting. He shows you a page sprinkled with symbols you can almost read: a little hand for do not sign contracts, a fish for good to fish, a stern skull for stay home. He traces a date with an ink-dark nail and suggests you travel after next quarter moon, not before, because your ankles. You consider your patents and accept the cosmic concern. Third gentle joke. You realize Tudor horoscopes are surprisingly practical. Today you will meet mud, bring shoes. A widow tells a story about hearing 3 knocks on her shutter the night her sister died 3 towns away. Always 3, she says, and the room hums respectfully. Someone adds that will-o'-the-wisps love the marsh this time of year. Someone else swears that a hare ran straight up a cottage wall Thursday last, which seems biologically ambitious but narratively perfect. You learn the taxonomy of fear: churchyard lights, fetches, corpse candles, bargemen who hear oars where no water lies. None of it feels like theater. It feels like grammar for weather inside the chest. When the wind picks up, a man tosses a pinch of salt into the fire to quiet it. Another taps his beer 3 times on the table before drinking. To wake the good luck, he winks. A girl recites a rhyme over the rushlight as she snuffs it so it will consent to a flame tomorrow. You tuck away one charm for yourself: bread set upside down invites quarrels, bread set right invites breakfast. Your trenchers will never be allowed to sulk again. Stars harden outside. Someone fetches you to the yard to listen for the church owl. It hoots from the tithe barn, bookish and solemn. A man spits, politely sideways. Bad when it sits on a roof. The wise man shrugs. Bad when a roof sits on a man. Laughter, then relief. The night cracks its shoulders and decides to be ordinary. You remember the bear pit's howls, the court's trumpets, the field's flails. Superstition is merely the century's way of braiding noise into meaning and fear into ritual so sleep can find the door. Before you step back to your straw bed, you pass a door where parsley spills from a pot on the sill. The housewife taps it twice and tells you parsley brings guests, which is good when your larder stands proud, and inconvenient when the salted beef needs another week. She gives you a sprig anyway, as if you needed another herb, and you tuck it beside rosemary, your pocket a small hedgerow. Historians still argue whether the crown frowned equally on all superstitious practices or turned blind eyes to comforts that kept villages calm. The reality you've walked tonight is compromise: prayers at church, pins in bottles, iron at doors, jokes over ale. You climb the ladder to your loft and sit with your feet on the rushes for a quiet minute. The rosemary smells singed and sweet. The parsley smells hopeful. Your shoes smell like honesty. You set your bread right side up, touch the doornail with 2 fingers, and decide that in a world without switches or syringes, these small motions are light and medicine by other names. Whether they work or simply help you believe the night will be kind, you cannot prove. You only know you can now lie down, and the house, stitched with signs and good habits, seems to lie down too. Sleep comes, not as conquest but as agreement. The rafters tick, the owl textbooks the dark, and your luck, tied loosely with blue thread, sighs and stays. A narrow stair curls upward in the palace like an italic letter, and you are shown into a schoolroom so neat it seems starched. Sunlight finds the dust in well-bred, well-behaved beams. A table holds quills trimmed as precisely as courtiers' beards, and near the hearth sits a chessboard where the ivory queen gleams with suspicious confidence, as if recent history had given her new powers. The prince, small, alert, a hawk in velvet, glances up. His tutor inclines his head and bids you sit where you can be impressed without interfering. You fold yourself onto a bench, rough counseling posture as always, and prepare to watch how a kingdom teaches itself to breathe. The morning's lesson is rhetoric, the Tudor heart of education. Latin first, then Greek if fortune smiles, and always the art of arranging words like troops. The boy recites a passage from Cicero, then a double translation exercise, Latin to English, then back to Latin without peeking, so memory and style braid together. Mainstream fact: Roger Ascham, humanist, courtier, author of The Schoolmaster, published in 1570, famously praised this gentle, exact method. and he taught it to Elizabeth and to Lady Jane Grey, who once confessed she preferred Plato to hunting because her parents' scolding was harsher than any book. The tutor today, schooled in that humanist fashion, corrects lightly the way a gardener coaxes a topiary rather than hacks at it. You wince remembering the schoolmaster's birch from your village visit. Here the rod hangs like an empty threat whose bark has been rewritten into grammar. First, gentle joke. You conclude that in palaces even discipline has good penmanship. Refute me, the tutor says, and the prince begins a miniature oration against idleness, citing Sallust, seasoning with Seneca, garnishing with a proverb about ants. Chess pieces click, the boy's offhand pastime, while his other hand sketches little rhetorical figures in the wax tablet's margin. The board itself tells a story. In earlier centuries, the queen moved like a timid bishop. By the late 15th century, her powers had exploded. The Tudor board reflects that revolution. A new, swift queen darting across squares, an irresistible metaphor for a country that will soon serve a real one. You glance at the tutor. He does not mention the analogy, but the room breathes it. Between declamations, a master of languages enters, all soft shoes and sharper vowels. French first, he says, and the prince obediently slides from Latin into a silken je vous prie, then trips into Italian with cheerful bravado. A clerk lays a map on the table. New rivers, dangerous coasts, and names the ports you smelled: Antwerp, Calais, still English for part of the century, Lübeck in the Baltic. Merchants live by tongues, the tutor adds, and kings by them too. Historians still argue whether Tudor investment in modern languages at court reflected practical diplomacy or fashionably continental taste. In this room, it's both, policy with a stylish hem. The daily round is not all ink. At a whistle, the prince stands for bodily exercises. A fencing master appears, rapier like a silver reed. A riding master strolls past the window, timing the lesson for later. A lutenist tunes in the corner, each string a promise that the mind will sing what it argues. Mainstream fact, elite education mixed humanist letters with dancing, writing, archery, and music. Skills meant to husband both war and peace. You try a fencing salute with your spoon and nearly stab your dignity. Second gentle joke, congratulations, you've invented the tableware on guard, a trend no one asked you to repeat. Back at the board, the prince plays a cautious opening, pawns like careful policy. The tutor nudges the bishop into danger and asks for a defense in Latin. The boy obliges, pivoting from strategy to syntax with the ease of someone who has practiced since dawn. A servant brings hypocrites in tiny sips, spiced wine for grown tongues, watered for princely ones, and sugared comfits that click like hail in the bowl. You take one and try to chew quietly, discovering that even candy has etiquette at this altitude. On a shelf, copybooks show two hands. Dense secretary for business, graceful italic for letters that flatter. The prince's italic is good. Italian tutors have done their work, and you watch as he rounds it delicately as if it might bruise. Quirky tidbit. The fashion for italic hand spreads at court, helped by imported copybooks, and some nobles commission professional penmen to make their letters look as elegant as their sleeves. You consider hiring a penman to apologize to your wrist for amo, amus, amet. Then remember you are paid in pottage and rosemary. The music master takes his turn. The prince counts time in his head while his fingers walk the lute like a mild-mannered spider. The melody is dignified, the tempo uncruel. Music softens speech, the tutor murmurs, and speech tames steel. You think of bear pits and Caravaris and the clamor of market bells. This room is noise domesticated, the world taught to step inside without tracking mud. Yet even here, rumor prowls. A gentleman by the door whispers about faction, about one counselor's rise and another's nap in disfavor. Historians still argue whether court curricula formed neutral minds or smuggled in party lines with their Cicero. The tutor pretends not to hear, and the boy pretends to be real Cicero anyway. Afternoon, the dancing master arrives with a bow that contains a lecture. He teaches a pavane, measured, grave, the body's version of handwriting. Heel, toe, rise, acknowledge. Nothing hurried, everything meant. You keep up for 3 steps and then step carefully back into anonymity. Third gentle joke, you decide the pavane is just walking with a better resume. Meanwhile, the chess game reaches a tidy middle, and the ivory queen, patient so far, decides to intervene. Check comes like a thesis statement. The prince smiles sheepishly and finds his way out with the knight. Relief tastes like comfit dust. A page enters with a small hawk hooded in leather, a promise of afternoon air. Lessons will resume with a hunt. Fieldcraft is curriculum. The meadow is a page written and sent. The tutor sets a brief disputation before they go. On mercy, of all things. Which is the king's better instrument, he asks. Severity or clemency? The boy, eyes still on the hawk, argues for clemency framed by justice, quotes Seneca again, and then adds in English that a hungry town is an angry one. The tutor's face softens. Mainstream fact, princely mirrors, advice books, and staged debates train rulers to perform virtue publicly and to think about grain, coin, and war as moral weather. Before you leave, a servant carries in a little silver-bound volume of prayers, and the boy kneels briefly with his chaplain. The humanists cite Plato and Cicero. The clerics answer with scripture. The schedule makes room for both. Historians still argue whether the prince's piety is stagecraft or sustenance. You watch the quick sincerity of a child who has been told he will one day rule, and you decide the answer won't fit on a tally stick. In the corridor, you pass a whisper about a whipping boy, another child supposedly punished when a prince errs because no one may strike royal flesh. Historians still argue whether such a practice truly existed in Tudor days or blossomed later in Stuart lore. You note the room's gentle methods and file the rumor beside unicorn horn and dragon's blood, useful stories, uncertain bones. The boy you saw today is corrected in syntax, not skin. The stair delivers you back to air that smells less of ink and more of kitchens. Your own education today. Princes learn the same verbs you struggle with: eat, bow, ride, write, but conjugated in public. Their mornings braid Cicero with chess, their afternoons braid hawk with hymn, and their nights will eventually braid mercy with law. You tuck your rosemary sprig closer, as if a small herb could memorize a large day, and step away from the schoolroom before the queen on the board can check you for gawking. Dusk folds the palace staircase behind you and follows you into the lanes like a well-bred shadow. The last merchants shutter their stalls. A baker brushes flour from his sleeves and pulls the door to. Somewhere a housewife snaps a broom against the threshold to chase out the day. Night in Tudor Britain doesn't arrive with a switch. It settles by chores. You help bank the hearth, rake embers under a quilt of ash so they'll survive till morning, then fumble for light, and light is not obvious. Candles exist, yes, but beeswax belongs to churches and rich tables. You live by rushlight, the pith of a marsh rush, dried, then dipped in tallow till it remembers fire. You clamp it in an iron-jawed holder, cock it at a hungry angle, and watch it smolder to life with a smoke that smells faintly like last week's supper. First gentle joke. Congratulations, you have invented mood lighting. And the mood is, did someone burn a barn? The room reshapes itself around the small flame. Walls lean closer, beams grow heavier, familiar objects sprout secrets. A child threads a bone needle through a torn sleeve while an older woman turns a distaff of flax, letting the wheel purr like a cat with ambitions. By the hearth, someone warms a brick to slip between sheets later. A bedfellow claims the brick is the only suitor who never snores. The rushlight gutters, spits, and soldiers on. You angle it lower to slow the burn. The holder's jaws bite the rush like a stern schoolmaster. Quirky tidbit: for street errands, you slide that small flame into a lanthorn, not glass, but translucent slices of horn that tame the wind, so your hand becomes a tiny traveling moon. Outside, the parish watch clumps past with halberds, staves, and a collection of opinions. Past 9 of the clock, and all's well, a voice cries, as if reassurance could be shouted into bricks. Mainstream fact: town and city parishes keep a night watch. Neighbors drawn by rota, sometimes hirelings, meant to mind curfew fires and night walkers. Some watches are diligent, some sociable, some asleep. Historians still argue whether lighting orders, hang out lanterns on winter nights, keep candles in upper windows, were widely enforced before the next century, or mostly aspirational. Either way, most streets now belong to the dark, with guidance by memory and the occasional moon. You bar the door with a thunk, Locks are simple, trust is complicated, and wood is comfortingly honest about what it can't do. A leather bucket hangs ready against fire. A fire hook leans near the hearth to yank down thatch if sparks misbehave. Every Tudor fears flame the way sailors fear a lee shore. You check the shutter pegs and push a twist of wool into a drafty crack. From outside comes a cough, a whisper, the soft clop of a late horse. You remember the constable's warnings about night walkers. Not exercise enthusiasts, but the idle and the predatory. Walking without a reason after dark is its own kind of confession. Second gentle joke. By Tudor standards, your midnight snack run counts as a minor crime of pastry. Time loosens. There's no clock on the mantle, only bells at the church and the slow physics of tallow. Someone sets an hourglass on the table and flips it with ceremony. Others read time off memory. The bread was set to rise. The baby should wake soon. The watch will cry the hour again. A boy squints at a dog-eared primer by rushlight, lips moving over a psalm while his sister whispers the day's best gossip into his ear. You mend a torn point for your hose and prick your finger, just enough to say hello to reality. A dab of tallow, a muttered oath downgraded to a sigh. PG-13 was invented by cottages. Beyond the door, the city exhales, smells the sun hid. Smoke flattens against the ground. Wet wood, horse, and that blunt civic perfume of gutters and byres mingle into a single ancient cologne. Somewhere, nightmen work, those unloved laborers who empty privy pits and haul the worst of the world out by lantern, paid in coin and curses. If you put your ear to the shutter, you might hear their cartwheels like a slow pen scratching out a necessary sentence. You make a note to wave at them in daylight. They hold a civilization together where it refuses to be polite. Stories come out because stories are what people do while light is scarce and hands remember useful things. The grandmother tells of a winter when the river froze and a frost fair sprang up, stalls on ice, gingerbread in breath-white air. The mason swears he saw St. Elmo's fire on a ship's yard once, foxfire in a hedgerow, witchfire nowhere, though he keeps iron nails in his pocket just in case. Iron keeps mischief out, he says, tapping the lintel nail you touched last night. The child asks for the one about the hair that ran up a wall. The adults exchange looks that say yes, but softly. A scratch skitters in the thatch. Everyone pauses. Cat leaps, child cheers, mouse regrets. Bedbugs, fleas, they are the other parishioners of night, and you brace yourself. You tie a kerchief over your hair because lice are democratic. A neighbor quietly combs a child's scalp with a fine-toothed comb and drowns the combings in a cup of oil. It's both gross and efficient. You pretend interest in the hourglass. The rushlight wheezes, third gentle joke. Your scalp itches with such theatrical conviction that even the cat looks impressed. Prayers fold the room into smaller, kinder spaces. Some kneel by the bed, some pray standing because knees have already paid all day. Some just murmur thanks into the linen. A thin-walled house makes piety a chorus. You can hear your neighbor's amen as easily as his sneeze. Then the choreography of bed, straw shaken, mattress flipped to confuse the lumps, warming brick deployed like a strategic ally. In poorer cottages, bodies lie crosswise to fit more in, children tucked like commas, adults like parentheses. You keep your linen shift on. Nightshirts are warmth and modesty, and pull a coarse wool coverlet up to your chin. The last ember winks. Dark settles so thoroughly that even your thoughts stub their toes on it. Outside, the watch calls again. Nearer, a dog answers, then thinks better of it. The floor creaks as cooling wood sighs. Your eyes adjust until the shutter line is a dim silver grammar mark. Once you feel the house's heartbeat, you also feel its nerves. The latch that could lift, the shutter that could stick, the thatch that could forget itself. You promise the bucket you'll remember where it hangs if anything hisses wrong. Sleep doesn't come obediently, it sidles. You inventory the day, the prince's chessboard, the garden's clipped edges, the field's straight furrows, and compare them to night's unruled page. In the dark, punishments and plagues shrink a little. Thieves and flames grow larger. Hunger keeps its size. You reach for the sprig of rosemary by your pillow. Remember the wise woman's advice? And the scent is an argument for mourning. If superstition is a fence, you decide, let this fence be made of herbs. Somewhere, a distant bell tolls the late service for monks you'll never meet, a remnant rhythm from before Reform taught churches new music. Historians still argue whether curfew customs, cover the fire at the bell, doors barred at set hours, survived in practice or merely in proverb by your century's middle. In this lane, they survive as habit. People bank their embers and themselves not because an officer stands outside with a list, but because the dark loves carelessness like a cat loves laps. The hourglass empties, someone flips it, you forget to count. Dreams begin as inventory and turn into parade. Pattens clop softly down a moonlit alley. A rosemary sprig sprouts into a hedge that keeps out everything except kind neighbors. A watchman raises his halberd and it becomes a rake in a sunny field. Your body loosens its arguments. The cat, victorious, stations herself on your feet like a sandbag against cold. The warming brick cools, sighing of usefulness. Your last waking thought is absurdly administrative. Tomorrow you will trim the rushes, scrape the tallow, and ask the neighbor whether horn panes can be polished with a wool scrap. You want a clear moon in your hand. And then it happens. You fall into the kind of sleep that Tudor Britain earns. Hard, immediate, generous. No clocks punish you, no screens rehearse your mistakes. Only a watchman's cry swims by from time to time like a benevolent fish, reminding you that outside the barred door the world goes on. In a place where day is a test and afternoon a thesis, night is the footnote that saves your page, brief, smoky, imperfect, but enough. Morning opens like a cold door, the air nips your nose and climbs into your sleeves with the persistence of a tax collector. Winter in Tudor Britain doesn't ask for your opinion. It takes it along with your fingertips. You step outside, breath smoking, and the village has traded its greens and browns for pewter and ash. Ruts are frozen into ridges, your pattens ring on them like small bells, and the lane's puddles have become glass you're afraid to trust. You tuck your faithful rosemary sprig closer, not that it's a stove, but hope is a good hand warmer. Fuel is the day's first verb. A cart creaks by, loaded with faggots bound tight, each bundle a little hedge on holiday. In cities, sea coal smolders sourly. London's chimneys cough their complaints. But out here, it's wood, peat, and whatever the hedgerows will yield without starting a lawsuit. Mainstream, fact, fuel scarcity pinches the poor every winter. Parish officers scrounge sea coal shipments for almshouses, and great houses manage forests like larders of heat. You join a line of neighbors who tramp toward the coppice to gather what the steward allows. Fallen limbs, trimmings from last year's cut, nothing that makes the reeve clear his throat. First gentle joke. You learn that the village's unofficial winter hymn is Mind the Hedge, sung to the tune of your shins. Back in the cottage, the hearth squats like a small sun that forgot it's not supposed to set. The fire dogs brace a pot. The crane swings it out and in, a clanking metronome for soup. Someone brings in a warming brick, reheated at the coals, and tucks it into the straw mattress to civilize the sheets. You rotate the brick like an honored guest and consider inviting it to stay permanently. A child lays rushes near the door to catch melted snow. The rushlight chews its tallow with extra appetite, as if the dark is thicker in January and demands a larger tip. Food narrows, salt beef loosens in water, then simmers for hours with peas until the kitchen smells like patience, bread slices thinner than pride, cheese becomes a punctuation mark. You raid the pickles, onions bright as small moons, cabbage whose brine remembers summer fields, a scrap of quince paste that tastes like a rumor about August. Quirky tidbit. Some swear by posset for frost, milk warmed with ale, nutmeg if the purse cooperates, a spoon of honey. So the cold remembers it's mortal. You sip and agree that mortality has never gone down so gently. Outside, the parish dole is measured into bowls at the church porch. Fruminy here, fuel there, a broad hand on the shoulder. By late Tudor years, parish poor relief has sharper edges and sturdier boxes. Church wardens keep lists and collect rates that eventually harden into the famous poor laws. Mainstream fact, statutes of 1598 and 1601 fix parish responsibility for the destitute, organizing relief and apprenticeships, even as the hungry winter still knocks with both hands. You watch a widow receive a loaf, tuck it under her cloak, and nod the way people nod when thanks burns too hot for words. Wind flutes along the timbers, window panes where there are panes wear frost and scrolls that could embarrass the best carver. Oiled paper windows hold against drafts like valiant parchment. A boy scratches his name in the frost with a nail, then breathes to fill the letters with mist, a fleeting signature. You slide a strip of wool at the sill, plugging the place where night sneaks in on padded feet. Second gentle joke. Congratulations, you've invented weatherproofing with the revolutionary new material called whatever's lying around. By noon, neighbors drift to the river, bundled in layers that turn them into ambulatory feather beds. The surface is iron. Children test it with boots, then with laughter. Dogs slide joyful and bewildered. In hard winters, the Thames itself sulks into stillness, and Londoners grow brave, erecting stalls, roasting meat on the ice, slinging ballads where boats should go. Historians still argue whether Tudor London managed full frost fairs or only their unruly cousins before the famous pageants of the next century. Either way, the instinct is the same. When the river turns into a road, people walk it with astonished feet. Here, your local stream is a smaller stage, but it hosts the same play. Cautious joy with a course of mind where it thins. The afternoon is short. You mend, you patch, you bless the tailor who cut last year's coat with enough sense to permit another lining. Lips crack. Someone passes, goose grease is balm. Noses redden. Cloth caps creep lower. You tie a blue thread around a child's wrist, a winter charm against coughs, and the wise woman winks as if to say the thread helps precisely as much as being seen. Historians still argue whether the Little Ice Age sharpened Tudor winters into true scythes or whether price rises and population growth did more damage than weather ever could. Your bones vote for both, especially when the north wind attends the debate. By lamplight, horn lantern light, you visit the brew house. Small beer bubbles in its winter habit. Barm climbs its foamy ladder. The ale-conner performs a sticky-seated inspection with heroic professionalism. Warm mugs pass from hand to hand, and for a moment the room is summer disguised as steam. Stories rise with it, of wolves seen in far counties, probably just dogs with good publicity, of a traveling seller whose beard froze into tiny icicles like a saint of January. Someone boasts about walking across a mill pond that usually swallows ducks whole. Third gentle joke. You nod solemnly and claim you crossed the largest puddle in London last week, without pattens, and lived to tell it. The room applauds your obvious bravery. Night clamps down early, but the village pushes back with company. A neighbor brings a fiddle and a rhyme. Children play a game where you guess the object by touch in a bag of honest odds and ends. A thimble, a wooden spoon, a carved saint missing his nose. The midwife arrives and checks her basket. Winter is stern with the new, and she will not be caught without fennel or courage. A man sets a pan of coals under the table, a brazier low as a cat, to warm shins and stories. You keep your feet clear of sparks and your cup clear of emptiness. Hunger is never far. You feel it in the careful way people measure portions, in the quiet that falls when someone mentions a failed barley field 2 parishes over, in the way even jokes take a breath before they land. Yet, generosity is here too. A knock at the door, a bowl passed, a child sent with a crust to an old man who lives alone. You think of the almoner collecting trenchers at the royal feast, of the tithe barn's tenth, of the gleaner's willow basket. Winter is when all those systems confess whether they were theory or promise. Late, you bank the fire and tuck the warming brick back into bed like a small, well-behaved pet. The cat occupies your feet with sovereign rights. The rosemary by your pillow has dried to a crisp, giving up its last ghost of green. You breathe it anyway because memory warms too. Outside ice tightens its fist around the well, and the watchman's cry comes thin and far, blown into ribbon by the wind. Would you last a day in Tudor Britain's winter? Maybe, if the parish remembers you, if your neighbors keep a space at the brazier, if your pattens hold, if your posset is hot, and if the rosemary keeps dreams tidy. That's a lot of ifs, but tonight, wrapped in wool that smells like honest sheep and smoke, you count them like blessings, one by one. Set your shoulders down. Let the lane grow soft and far away. The hammering of the day, market cries, flails on grain, fiddles and watchman calls, thins to a hush like snow falling beyond shutters. The hearth banks itself without your help, embers ruffling into a slow, kind glow. You let your breath match that glow, steady and unhurried, warm at the edges. Picture the garden you walked, the clipped knots, the rosemary sentries, the bees that droned like a gentle lullaby. They're sleeping now under frost that doesn't bite, only silvers the outlines. The banqueting house at the far wall holds a small lamp, and inside someone has left a plate of comfits for morning, forgotten and perfect. The path is swept, Your step is quiet, the air tastes of mint. Down in the town, stall boards are folded. The bear pit is only a ring of posts in the dark. The tavern door is latched with a promise to sing again tomorrow. The river's glass, but you do not test it. You simply watch moonlight draw a pale road and then erase it, the way sleep opens and closes. In your pocket, the rosemary is a thin line of green. At your feet, the cat is a warm comma, pausing the sentence of the night right where you need it. The warming brick has cooled, but stays tame, a quiet stone that remembers fire. Your hands are empty of tools. Every list can wait. Let the house breathe for you, a long, slow breath that fills the rafters, crosses the threshold nail, drifts past the horn lantern, and settles again. You are safe enough for now, behind a door that knows its latch, beside neighbors who share their brazier, under a sky that keeps its bells at a distance. Let your eyes close. Let Tudor Britain turn itself like a great wooden wheel, gentle and steady, until morning finds you rested.